Chapter 642 Confrontation 1. She tilted her head slightly. What are you thinking about? Brian blinked, pulled from his thoughts. For a moment he seemed hesitant, as if unsure whether to speak. But then he sighed softly. A youth, he said at last. Someone who caught my attention a while ago. Her brows arched in mild curiosity. For the Mad Phoenix to describe someone that way was unusual. A youth? She repeated. Who is he? Brian didn't see any harm in sharing. He's an awakener. An awakener? The Empress murmured, intrigued. What class? Necromancer. At that, her brows rose slightly. A necromancer wasn't a common awakener class, but it didn't seem like it was enough to. It was then she recalled something. Perhaps Brian saw something similar in this youth? However, this wasn't a question to ask the Mad Phoenix directly. A necromancer, you say? She mused quietly. And what makes him stand out? Has he shown any particular talent? Brian's gaze grew distant. Not wanting to talk about the true reason, he switched to something else that could satisfy the Empress' curiosity. At first, I wasn't sure. He seemed ordinary. But later, I found out he encountered a unique opportunity in the land of origin. What kind of opportunity? The Empress asked, her tone sharpening with interest. He became a high human. The Empress's eyes widened slightly. For the first time in the conversation, genuine surprise crossed her face. A high human? Brian nodded. Yes, it seems the land of origin favored him. The transformation wasn't incomplete either. The Empress fell silent, her expression thoughtful. High humans were among the peak races in the known universe, equal to elves in potential and longevity, and far superior to most mortal species. Even within the void, they were considered noble and rare. For an awakener from Aurora to ascend to such a race was extraordinary. To think Brian would encounter someone like that. Fate had a strange way of connecting paths. She closed her eyes briefly, her mind already turning. Her thoughts drifted to her favorite grandchild, a girl with a rare constitution and also an awakener herself. If that girl and this high human youth were to meet, her lips curved ever so slightly, the faintest glimmer of amusement in her gaze. Perhaps then, she thought, my useless sons will finally be overshadowed by someone worthy. A prodigy born from two extraordinary bloodlines. Such a union might very well produce a being capable of standing where even she stood one day at the Emperor stage or perhaps beyond. The Empress looked back at Brian, her expression calm again. Tell me more about this youth, she said softly. I would like to know what kind of person could leave such an impression on the Mad Phoenix. Michael sneezed. He blinked and rubbed his nose, frowning slightly. Is someone cursing me behind my back? He muttered under his breath. After a moment, a small, knowing smile tugged at the corner of his lips. If someone like that really existed, he already had a good idea who it might be. Lyra, who was beside him, seeing his smile, thought of something else. Lyra glanced at him, a hint of curiosity flickering in her eyes. Are you confident? She asked suddenly. Michael turned his head toward her, his smile deepening. What do you think? She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. His calmness alone was an answer. Michael wasn't just confident, he was certain. Rumors had long spread throughout the academy about him. The rank 1 student who possessed a rank 3 undead. Still, Lyra couldn't help but recall what she'd heard about Rin. Halvain. The girl was said to be a genius among geniuses, one who had already begun comprehending her law even before reaching level 50. Such talent was terrifying. Yet despite that, Lyra still saw a clear gap between her and Michael. If she could see it, then Rin should be able to as well. So why did she still dare to challenge him? Lyra's lips pressed together slightly, her gaze flicking toward Michael's composed face. Either she's confident beyond reason, or she's hiding something, she thought quietly. It was then Michael's voice pulled her from her thoughts. By the way, he said casually, how does the contest for rank work? Are there any restrictions? His tone was calm, but Lyra could sense the sharpness beneath it. He might have looked relaxed, yet his mind was already analyzing every angle. Confidence was one thing, but Michael was far from careless. After all, except Rin was an idiot, there was no reason to take his rank unless she believed she had the strength or something to back it up. The contest is held under the supervision of a teacher, Lyra explained. It's meant to prevent unnecessary accidents. The rule is simple: only your own strength counts. Michael tilted his head slightly. Only your own strength? He repeated. That sounds vague. What exactly does that mean? It means, Lyra said, meeting his gaze, that you can't use borrowed power, and even the treasures used in the battle must be below epic grade. Anything higher will be restricted. Michael nodded slowly, thoughtful. So even borrowed strength is limited. Exactly, she said. The fight is meant to show personal capability. A faint smile touched Michael's lips. Then it seems fair enough. But in his heart, he couldn't help but feel intrigued. If Rin knew all that and still challenged him, then she must have something unusual prepared. Either that, or she was planning to make this interesting. Just as that thought passed through his mind, Michael's edgeband vibrated faintly. He glanced down, and a glowing message appeared across the screen. His eyes moved over it once before he said quietly, "It looks like the teacher's been assigned." Lyra leaned forward slightly. "Already?" "Yeah," Michael said. "The message says all participants are to gather at the combat hall in 20 minutes. Thanks for reading today's chapters, and please continue to support the novel. See you in the next updates." Chapter 643, Special Class Edited. The fight for ranking within the academy wasn't complicated. A student could challenge anyone ranked above them. If they lost, they would keep their current position but wouldn't be allowed to challenge that same person again for a month. If they won, however, they would claim the higher rank, while the defeated student would be unable to issue a challenge for the next 2 months. This structure was intentional. It ensured that both victory and defeat carried weight. The winner couldn't afford to grow complacent, knowing others would be aiming for their spot once their protection period ended, while the loser was given time to reflect, improve, and prepare for a proper comeback. Without such a system, rankings would change daily, and the academy would descend into chaos. After all, ranks weren't just about prestige. As Michael made his way toward the combat hall, he quickly noticed he wasn't the only one heading there. At first, he thought it was just a few students, which was normal, but as he continued walking, the crowd thickened. Students in academy robes filled the pathways, some chatting excitedly, others practically jogging in the same direction. The air buzzed with energy. It might have been fine if it was limited to a small number, but this was far from that. Judging by the sea of faces, it seemed like almost every student from both the first and second years currently in session was on their way to the hall. Michael frowned slightly. What's going on? He thought. He had a faint feeling in his chest, but he wasn't sure if he should take it seriously. Beside him, Lyra looked just as confused. Spotting a familiar face among the students, she stepped forward and called out, "Hey, run! What's happening? Why is everyone headed to the combat hall?" The young man she stopped turned at the sound of his name. When his eyes fell on Michael, he froze for half a second before forcing an awkward smile. Well, you see, word got out." "Word?" Lyra repeated, her brows furrowing. He scratched the back of his head, clearly unsure how to explain. Apparently, someone leaked that the 2 mysterious top 1 and top 2 students of year 1 were going to fight. You know how it is, official rank matches might not be announced, but they're never exactly hidden either. Everyone just decided to come watch. Lyra blinked in disbelief. "Everyone?" "Pretty much," Ren admitted with a sheepish grin. "It's not every day that something exciting happens in the academy. People just want to see what the hype's about." He stopped himself before saying too much, realizing how strange it was to say that right in front of one of the participants. His awkward grin tightened, and he quickly bowed. "Anyway, I should go now. Good luck." Then, before either of them could respond, he slipped away into the crowd. Lyra sighed softly. Michael watched Ren leave before glancing at Lyra. "Is it always like this?" he asked, his tone calm but faintly curious. Lyra shook her head. "Not really," she said after a moment. Usually, only popular students get this kind of attention and most of them are seniors. But given the situation this year, she paused, glancing around at the buzzing crowd. I'm not surprised people are interested in you and Rin. Michael hummed softly. He understood what she meant. Still, he couldn't help but wonder how the news had spread so quickly. Was it intentional? He thought. Could it be Rin's doing? He dismissed the idea almost as soon as it formed. Whether she leaked it or not didn't matter. To be honest, he didn't care for the attention or the drama. All he wanted was his rank back and with it, his villa dorm. As they continued toward the combat hall, the crowd's excitement only grew louder. The combat hall was, in simple terms, the academy's gym. From the outside it looked like a single massive block of white stone. It was not the only building of its kind on campus, but it was one of the few with this scale and layout. People often asked why Awakeners needed a gym at all. The answer was they came here to either keep their bodies in shape or to train skill. Raw stats could push a person's strength to absurd levels, but stats alone did not refine control. The hall's core feature was a suppression formation that weakened supernatural cells to a calibrated baseline. Under that field, an Awakener's physical output was reduced to levels that let them use specially made training tools without breaking them. Also, because Awakeners increase power through stats, some developed excess body fat while still being monstrously strong. This was either because they had the weight before they awakened or the things they took after awakening. With the formation active, even heavy Awakeners could cut weight, while rebuilding real conditioning. Still, the gym's main purpose was combat. Inside the hall, Michael's gaze swept the area until he spotted a cluster of faculty robes near the central arena. Standing beside them was a familiar figure with silver hair braided over one shoulder. Rin. That should be the teacher, he said lightly. Lyra gave a small nod, understanding without words. I'll watch from the side, she murmured, then peeled off into the crowd. Michael moved straight toward Rin. Even if she was not with the supervising teacher, staying near his opponent before the bout was reasonable. Up close, the supervising teacher came into focus. A lean woman in a dark coat. Her eyes were sharp and the feeling she gave Michael was strong. Instructor Cade, Rin said, noticing Michael's approach. Michael inclined his head. Michael Norman. Instructor Sarah Cade, the woman replied with a smile. Michael, who had always thought most of the academy's teachers were naturally friendly, didn't think much of the instructor's tone. Rin, however, noticed. Her eyes twitched almost imperceptibly. The teacher hadn't been disrespectful, yet the faint difference in attitude was obvious to her. It wasn't disdain, it was distance. A respectful wariness that came from knowing her lineage rather than her as a person. However, Rin had long grown used to this sort of treatment. From the moment she could remember, people had either bowed too low or looked too high when addressing her. They smiled too politely, measured their words too carefully, and treated her with the weight of her surname rather than her own worth. It was suffocating. Rin had never wanted to live in someone else's shadow, yet that shadow followed her everywhere. Every praise she received was laced with expectation, every greeting burdened with reverence. This was the reality she was born into. No matter how hard she worked, no matter what talent she showed, until she achieved something truly unmatched, she would always be the granddaughter of him, the granddaughter of an emperor. Her fingers tightened as she exhaled softly, forcing the bitterness back down. She had no intention of letting it show, not in front of Michael. If she couldn't change how others saw her, then she would crush their expectations the only way she knew how, through undeniable power. Instructor Cade glanced between them, her calm expression unchanged. Before we begin, she said, her voice carrying easily through the hall, state your names, your class, and your current level. She turned slightly toward Michael. You first. Michael nodded once and stepped forward. Michael Norman. Class, Necromancer. Level 50. Even though most of the students already knew that much, a subtle shift passed through the hall. Instructor Cade's gaze moved to Rin. Next. Rin took a measured breath and stepped forward as well. Her tone was composed, but her eyes were sharp, unwavering. Rin Halvain, Classamorer, level 47. Michael raised a brow. He wasn't surprised by the level 47 was impressive, but it was still within expectation for someone who had challenged him. What caught his attention was the class. Armorer. Though he was no longer a complete novice, the name was new to him. Yet it didn't sound ordinary. As Michael wondered what kind of class armorer could be, above the combat hall, a lone figure hovered in the air. If Michael could see him, he would have recognized the man instantly. After all, the colorful and eccentric director was hard to forget, especially with the kind of impression he'd left on him during their last encounter. Right now, that same director was floating effortlessly in the air, his hands clasped behind his back as he peered down at the hall below. Though there were multiple layers of barriers between him and the interior, his eyes pierced through them like they weren't even there. A faint, amused smile curved his lips. Truly magnificent, he murmured to himself. It would be far too boring if no one witnessed this. His gaze flicked toward the arena where Michael and Rin stood opposite each other. Now then, he said softly, eyes glinting with interest. Let's see how these two children fare against each other. The mystery was revealed. The news of the match hadn't been leaked by a student after all. Was the handiwork of the mischievous director himself. Chapter 644, Her Confidence. 1. Instructor Cade's calm voice brought the crowd back to silence. She turned to the side and gestured toward a tall stone pillar near the edge of the platform. At its top rested a glowing crystal orb that pulsed faintly with blue light. The duel will take place within the Academy's combat space, she explained. Once both of you place your hands on this orb, you'll be transferred inside. Everything inside is real, but when damage accumulates to a certain degree, it brings you out. She did not continue on the implications of this and allowed them to figure it out themselves. Cade's gaze returned to Michael and Rin. Before entering, there's one thing you both should understand clearly. Because Michael Norman lost his previous position by default and not through actual defeat, he retains the right to request a rematch at any time of his choosing. Similarly, if Rin Halvain were ever to lose her rank through a default, this same condition would apply. Only true defeat a clean, decisive loss within combat invokes the 1-month challenge restriction, Cade continued. In that case, the losing party will not be able to reissue a challenge for 30 days. And if the lower-ranked individual wins, her gaze briefly flicked to Michael Dash, the defeated party will be barred from challenging again for 2 months. Do you both understand? Michael nodded. Understood. Rin gave a calm, wordless nod of her own. Good. Cade's tone softened slightly. Then we'll proceed. She motioned toward the orb. Place your hands on the pillar. Once you do, the formation will activate, and you'll be transferred to the combat space. Michael stepped forward first, resting his hand lightly on the orb's surface. Rin mirrored his movement on the opposite side. The orb brightened, its light shifting from blue to white. The ground beneath their feet hummed as complex runes ignited across the arena floor. Match begin, Cade announced. In that instant, the light flared, swallowing both figures whole. The next second, Michael and Rin were gone. In another part of the combat hall, Rin sat with his arms folded, eyes fixed on the large screen that shimmered above the pillar. The display projected a live view of the duel inside the space, a feature originally meant for supervising instructors before it was later open to the public for friendly matches between students that didn't require an instructor to be present. Through the screen, they could get an idea of what was happening inside the combat space. Without this display, they would have to rely on the default method of bringing the participants out only after one side was defeated. In special cases, such as mutual destruction or unforeseen danger, the supervising student or instructor could intervene through the system and immediately extract both combatants. Right now, Rin's expression was unreadable. Pretty tense, huh? A voice drawled beside him. Rin's jaw clenched. Shut up, Kieran. The young man next to him, tall, with messy brown hair and an irritating smirk, chuckled lightly, unfazed by the venom in Rin's tone. What? Can't a guy talk? You seem awfully on edge. Nervous for your little sister. I said shut up. Kieran leaned back lazily in his seat, completely ignoring the warning. Come on, don't glare at me like that. I'm just curious. Rin didn't reply, though a faint crackle of mana pulsed from him, a warning that made the nearby air hum faintly. Kieran's grin widened. Relax. No need to get violent. I'm just wondering how it feels. You know, seeing your sister go against that mysterious Michael Norman. Heard he's the new golden boy of the academy. The look Rin gave him could have frozen fire. Keep talking, he said coldly, and you'll find out how it feels to wake up in the infirmary. Kieran laughed, though his body stiffened slightly. Despite his teasing, he wasn't stupid. He knew the difference between irritation and killing intent, and Rin's presence now carried traces of the latter. Still, that only made him more amused. Touchy as ever, he said, hands raised in mock surrender. Guess the rumors were right then. Rin's gaze sharpened. What rumors? That you lost to that same first year not long ago. Kieran tilted his head, pretending to think. Oh wait, was that supposed to be a secret? Rin's aura flared before vanishing in a blink. He exhaled slowly, suppressing the urge to draw his weapon right there. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm again, but dangerously calm. You should be more careful with your mouth, Kieran. The other boy chuckled again but fell silent, though his eyes glimmered with mischief. He didn't fear Rin completely, but he respected his strength enough not to push too far. Both of them turned their attention back to the screen. Inside the projected image, Michael and Rin stood within a vast, stone-lined arena that stretched beneath a crimson sky. The moment Michael entered the mysterious space, he wasted no time drawing his weapon. At the same time, he activated several body fortification skills. Though confident in his strength, he wasn't arrogant enough to underestimate his opponent. Believing Rin couldn't be a fool, he chose to go all out from the start. Just as he was debating whether to summon one of his undead from the space within the damaged coffin of the Forgotten in his soul, which he wasn't against since his possession of rank 3 undead was already an open secret, a massive fist suddenly appeared before his face, moving at an incredible speed. Instinctively, Michael activated his movement skill and vanished from the spot. Boom! A thunderous explosion echoed through the area where he had stood a second earlier. Dust and debris scattered violently, and the air rippled from the shockwave. Michael's eyes narrowed as he steadied himself, a faint look of disbelief crossing his face. That didn't seem normal. When the dust finally cleared and he caught sight of Rin, his expression twisted in surprise. So this is an armorer? He muttered. Classes were usually self-explanatory from their names. Michael had expected an armorer to be someone who created or enhanced armor, maybe a support-type combatant. Something along those lines. But what he was seeing before him was nothing like that. Chapter 645, Her Confidence. 2. Edited. Rin stood across the arena, her form almost unrecognizable beneath what looked like a massive, black and silver suit of armor. Rin stood across the arena, her form encased in what looked like a sleek exosuit. It had the presence of a small mecha. Matte black plates overlapped with silver edges, and lines of pale blue runes pulsed across each segment like living circuits. Every rune brightened and dimmed in a rhythm that matched a breathing. 2 rune-etched plates hovered at her flanks. They rotated in slow orbits. Anchored to her back was a staff taller than she was. Michael watched the system as a whole. So this is the armorer, he said quietly. In fact, Michael wasn't wrong. The armorer class really was just like that, but to describe it more accurately, in the supernatural world, one could call them arms dealers. It was a special grade class, rare and powerful. Every level granted the user 5 free attribute points, putting them on par with other high-grade professions in terms of growth potential. But to maintain balance, the class came with a heavy limitation. Its strength didn't come directly from the user, but from what they could build and power. The armorer's combat ability relied almost entirely on external items, armor, weapons, mechanical constructs, and rune engines. Without them, even a high-level armorer could easily be outmatched by a well-trained combatant of a simpler class. Rin's case, however, was different. Exceptionally different. Her uniqueness came from 2 things: her physique and her world. Rin possessed a rare constitution that allowed her life force to grow in proportion to her mana. In other words, the more mana she had, the stronger and denser her life energy became. This created a peculiar harmony between vitality and energy flow, turning her into an almost inexhaustible power source. Now combine that with being born in a world where advanced technology had been perfected. Something extraordinary emerged. What happened when someone like her, a living mana life force, hybrid, became the battery of her own creations? And not just any battery but a high-tier one that could channel both mana and vitality directly into machinery? The answer was what stood before Michael now. A being who had merged magic and technology into one, creating a suit that wasn't just powered by mana cores or runestones, but by herself. This was Rin's confidence. The suit she wore was her latest masterpiece, one she had created recently with the help of her family's resources. It was an experimental Magitech exosuit crafted from materials bordering on epic grade. The resonance it gave off was almost indistinguishable from a true epic artifact, save for the instability her control making it a time-limited trump card. Michael could feel the energy humming from it even from across the field. A faint grin touched Michael's lips. He tightened his grip on his weapon. That looked so cool. Michael's surprise hadn't even faded before Rin moved. Her armor's runes flared bright blue, the glow spreading across her body in a spiderweb of light. The air around her vibrated, and then, without warning, she pointed both hands toward him. Twin circles of light expanded from her palms, their runic rings spinning at blinding speed. Zra! A concentrated beam of energy erupted from both hands, merging midair into a single massive blast that tore across the arena. The air screamed under the pressure, the ground splitting apart where the beam passed. Michael's eyes widened as his instincts screamed. He managed to sidestep, his form blurring as his movement skill triggered again. The beam grazed his afterimage, the heat and force of it distorting space itself. The explosion that followed shook the entire arena. A deep crater formed where he had been standing moments ago. Shattered stone and molten dust spiraled outward in waves. Michael landed several meters away, his cloak whipping from the shockwave. "She's flying now?" he muttered, glancing up. Indeed, Rin had taken to the air. She looked almost divine. She wasn't done yet. Before Michael could even fully steady himself, Rin lifted her. Hands again. The runic patterns on her armor surged with light, and another pair of magic circles materialized around her palms, larger and more intricate than before. Then came the sound, a deep, thrumming hum that made the entire space vibrate. Zrum! Beams of condensed blue-white energy shot toward Michael in rapid succession, each one exploding on impact with the ground like a barrage of artillery shells. The heat distorted the air, and every strike left glowing cracks across the arena floor. Michael darted left, his movements blurring into afterimages as he avoided the bombardment. The residual energy still burned across his coat, and dust and light chased him like a storm. "She's not giving me any room to breathe," he muttered under his breath. But that wasn't all. The two floating plates that had been orbiting Rin's sides suddenly halted midair, the runes carved into them shifting patterns. In the next second, both unleashed thin, focused beams of their own. They weren't as powerful as the main blasts, but their speed was terrifying. They pierced through the air like streaking lightning, cutting across Michael's predicted paths. "Titich!" He clicked his tongue, pivoting sharply. As he dodged one beam, another shot from the opposite direction, forcing him to twist midair and block with his spear blade. Rin was relentless. The runes along her armor flared even brighter as she continued firing. Each shot from her palms carried the destructive force of a cannon blast, while the two hovering plates spun faster, raining smaller, rapid-fire beams in unpredictable arcs. It was a storm of light. Yet through that chaos, Michael's silhouette blurred once more. He vanished. One instant he was there amid the barrage, the next he was gone. Rin's senses flared. Her visors targeting runes shifted wildly, searching for his presence. A half-second later, a faint tremor of killing intent flickered right above her. Her eyes widened. Above dash. Before she could react, a dark figure burst out of thin air right over her head. Thanks for reading. Chapter 646, Her Law, Her Defeat. A hungry undead one. Before Rin could react, a dark figure burst out of thin air right over her head. Michael's body twisted in midair, the shaft of his spear glowing faintly as mana surged through it. Too slow, he said quietly. With a sharp downward strike, he brought the weapon down. Not with the blade, but with the reinforced shaft. It was an impact meant to crush, not pierce. Crack! The blow landed on Rin, and the force sent her hurtling toward the ground like a meteor. The arena shook violently as she slammed into the stone floor, a shockwave bursting outward. Dust and fractured rock exploded in every direction. Michael landed a short distance away, his cloak fluttering. He spun his spear once before resting it against his shoulder, eyes narrowing as he watched the dust cloud below. "I wonder if that'll keep her down," he said softly. True enough, the ground below began to glow. Through the settling dust, faint blue light bled outward from cracks in the rubble. Rin rose slowly from the crater, her visor locked onto Michael. "Good hit," her voice echoed, sounding dark and mechanical. Michael's brows furrowed slightly. Despite that direct hit, the armor didn't look anywhere near as damaged as he expected. "What the hell?" he murmured. Unknown to Michael, the armor Rin wore wasn't an ordinary creation. In the Federation's history of Magi tech development, this particular model could stand among their peak achievements. Rin's own version was even more exceptional. It was a semi-epic grade artifact after all. The materials used in its construction were already precious, not to mention the intricate runes and advanced technology engraved into its frame. Shooting beams was far from the only thing it could do. Redirecting the kind of blunt force Michael had delivered wasn't a problem for this armor. Michael, unaware of this, could only watch as faint light rippled across the black and silver surface, the armor's glow intensifying once again. "Redirected the impact?" he muttered a guess. Rin's voice came through her speaker, calm and confident. "Let me return the favor." She had only just finished speaking when the plates on her back shifted, releasing sharp jets of blue light as she shot forward like a missile, leaving a powerful sonic boom in her wake. The ground beneath her cracked from the thrust. The impact that followed was deafening. Michael braced himself, his spear raised across his body as the metallic blur collided with him like a runaway train. A violent shockwave rippled outward, shredding the dust in the air and shaking the entire arena. For a moment, both combatants vanished within the burst of light and sound. When the energy finally dispersed, Michael was still standing, his boots planted firmly against the fractured stone, cloak fluttering behind him. The ground beneath his feet had cratered from the sheer force he had absorbed. His hands trembled slightly on the spear shaft, a faint ache running through his arms. That was strong, he thought, a trace of genuine surprise flashing in his eyes. Based on his experience, the power behind that strike wasn't something a typical rank 2 should be able to produce. Even his reinforced body felt some pressure. Also, why was this academy cloth so sturdy? Across from him, Rin's breathing quickened inside the armor. The moment her fist connected, she had expected Michael to be blasted backward or at least forced to retreat, but he hadn't even budged. Not a single step. "How dash?" she whispered in disbelief. Her gaze dropped to his spear, still glowing faintly with contained mana. Not even the surface showed a single crack. Michael lunged forward, his spear thrusting in a smooth, fluid motion. Rin reacted instantly. The armor's thrusters flared, and she twisted her body mid-dash, the spear's tip grazing the outer edge of her pauldron by a hair's breadth. She shot backward, stabilizing herself with short bursts of blue light from the armor's jets. She locked onto Michael again, but he was already pressing her. Michael advanced like a storm. Rin gritted her teeth and pushed her armor to the limit, her body jolting from the constant strain of dodging. Every time she tried to counter, another attack came from an unexpected angle. Unfortunately for her, it has already clicked in Michael's mind. Between swings that the armor wasn't unbreakable. It had a limit. Rin's thoughts stumbled as she blocked another flurry. Was this how a necromancer fought? Who was this freak? Her plan had been simple. Hit Michael hard at the start. If he summoned undead, ignore them and keep the pressure on him. As long as she kept the crosshairs on the master, the rest would not matter. Reality did not match the plan. The armor had a limit, but compared to her, she was far inferior. Inside the shell, she felt her veins already pricked with heat. Calm down, she told herself. Then, after a moment hesitation, do I really have to do this? Under Michael's attacks, she could already see herself losing, but there was still one thing she had left in the bag. Michael had forgotten the oldest rumor about Rin Halvain. Before anyone knew her class, no one called her a crafter. They called her a mage with frightening comprehension. She still had something in the bag. Her law. Asterisk. On the viewing platform, the hall shifted from chatter to stunned quiet, then to a rising roar that rolled like a wave. Lyra forgot to breathe for a heartbeat. She knew Michael was strong. She had seen him trade with Rin and not lose ground in pure strength even as a necromancer. This was different. This was raw. Dominance. She swallowed and felt a flicker of something that was not quite fear and not quite awe. Which goddess gave birth to this freak? She was not alone. Impossible. He is only rank 2. Only. Are you blind? The clamor swelled. A cluster of seniors started talking at once. They knew the rumors of a certain Michael Norman had wiped out more than 1,000 students in the 3rd round of the college exams. There was proof. Even then, most had comforted themselves with a simple belief. His terror came from his undead. Without them, he would be manageable. The belief dissolved on the screen. Crazy. Both of them. 2 first years. This is not rank 2 anymore. No way. A group near the pillar broke into an argument. He is only this strong because he has rank 3 undead. He did not summon a single one. Are you stupid? He will when he gets pressed. Pressed by who? It seems a certain girl had developed a fan group in a short time. In a quiet corner, Kieran spoke. He did not smile this time. Your sister has hands, he said. I will give her that. Rin did not look at him. His eyes never left the screen. Kieran didn't bother with the silent response and continued. She's good, he admitted. Really good. I won't deny that. But with that much power, she's bound to lose sooner or later. The other guy hasn't. Even summoned his undead yet dash. He didn't get to finish. The words died in his throat as gasps tore through the hall. Rin was already half-turned toward him, anger ready to spill, when the image emitting from the pillar changed. Inside the combat space, Michael was just about to thrust his spear, this time with a true measure of strength straight into Rin's chest plate, and then the armor vanished. A ripple of confusion ran through the audience. What dash? Did she teleport? The scene inside shifted again. From the empty air above, a spark of blue light burst open and Rin reappeared mid-sky. Everyone watching froze. No one had expected her to have this move. Even Michael. The combat feed magnified, zooming in on Rin's airborne figure. It was then they noticed another important change. The exosuit was gone. No, it wasn't gone. It was as if the sleek black armor had been absorbed straight into Rin's body. Even Michael was surprised by the sight. Rin form was still humanoid, but changed. Her body gleamed. Faintly. Skin now smooth and metallic like polished silver. It was as though the mecha's armor had merged with her flesh. Her once waist-length hair cascaded down all the way to her feet. Her figure had lengthened and she stood taller than before. It was safe to say Rin Halvain had become the mecha itself. Gasps echoed through the hall. What is that? Did she fuse with her armor? However, what the others outside the space didn't notice, Michael did. The scent of law. He felt it radiating from Rin. At this point, Michael's expression was incredible. Though they were the same age, he couldn't deny that for the first time since he awakened, he actually met someone he felt a bit inferior to. Of course, he only thought so in terms of comprehension. And Michael was right. Rin was indeed using a law. It was also what was responsible for her current appearance. Chapter 647 Her Law, Her Defeat. A Hungry Undead, 2. Last day of the month. Requesting votes. Law of Perfection and Union. This was Rin's law. It was a rare law that embodied more than one truth, essentially two laws fused into one. It was a universal truth among supernaturals that one could only wield a single law. Yet across the vast universe, there were always exceptions. While only one law could be used to ascend, it was not an unbreakable rule that one had to be tied to a single greater law. The first step toward unity with the universe was understanding, and the universe itself was a body woven from countless laws. These laws were known as truths. Supernaturals grasped fragments of these truths, shaped them through their understanding, and ascended by imitating the world's authentic laws. Thus, even if two individuals drew from the same greater law, such as fire, their abilities differed, not from contradiction but perception. One might see fire as destruction, another as rebirth. And at times, by coincidence, two minds might align so closely that their laws appeared nearly identical. The universe was vast. For some, light was salvation. For others, it was two-faced. For some, darkness was chaos. For others, peace. As long as a supernatural could define meaning and order within a truth, that comprehension could become power. Laws that embodied truths from more than one greater law were possible, but their requirements were immense. Even geniuses like Brian, who fused three truths into one, created only a stronger, more versatile law. Of course, laws that embodied truths from more than one greater law were not necessarily superior. Strength was always subjective. Rin's law of perfection and union was a rare example of such dual comprehension. A law formed from two realized truths bound together in harmony. Each still retained its own truth individually, like the law of perfection. For Rin, the law of perfection, which was connected to the greater law of creation, represented the belief that everything in the universe possessed an ideal form. A seed was never meant to remain a seed, it was the beginning of a towering tree, the full expression of what it could become. Iron or buried in the earth was crude and impure, yet within it lay the potential for gleaming steel, for weapons and tools that shaped civilizations. Even the simplest elements, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, when arranged with precision, became the foundation of life itself. Perfection to Rin was not flawlessness. It was completion, the fulfillment of potential. Her law allowed her to glimpse that ideal and momentarily imitate it. At her current level, she could not permanently perfect something, but she could manifest a temporary imitation of what that object or being would be if it reached its ultimate, flawless state, or at least what her own comprehension of perfection believed it to be. A simple blade might gleam as though forged by a divine hand. A common stone might shimmer like a gemstone under her touch. Of course, she was still far from achieving certain feats. At least until she reached the stage where she could create something from nothing, she had to abide by the established rules of existence. Then there was her other law, the law of union. For Rin, the law of union, which was connected to the greater law of balance, stemmed from her belief that everything in the universe sought equilibrium. Nothing existed in isolation. Every force, every essence, every element required a counterpart to maintain harmony. Her realized truth from the law of balance, through which she formed her law of union, was simple yet profound. All things that exist can become one, so long as their purpose aligns. Fire and water were the most common example. Alone, they clashed endlessly, one smothering the other. Yet when united under the right conditions, they created vapor, neither flame nor liquid, but something new, something higher. All things could exist in union if their purpose aligned. This was the foundation of Rin's law of union. It allowed her to merge things that were difficult or even impossible, for others to combine. This was exactly what she had done with her armor. First, she fused the parts together seamlessly, then went a step further, merging the armor with herself to create a stronger, unified form. Unfortunately, her law was still only in its seeding stage. It held immense potential, but at present, It was merely a reflection of her concept, a mimicry of the true thing. That meant her current fusion was temporary and, once the effect faded, could lead to severe backlash on her body or the merged parts. However, none of these were Rin's current concerns. With her law active, Rin had brought the armor to an extreme level. Michael's gaze narrowed, his senses sharpening instinctively. An epic grade signature? He muttered under his breath, disbelief flashing in his eyes. The sensation was unmistakable. It was the faint resonance that only items of that tier emitted. But this wasn't an artifact lying in his soul space. It was coming from her, from Rin Halvain herself. The armor she had merged with had transcended its original level. By fusing her law of perfection with her law of union, she had forcibly elevated its essence. Rin gaze fixed on Michael. When she spoke, her voice had lost all trace of warmth. "Michael Norman," she said evenly. "Be careful of the next attack." The metallic echo in her tone continued. "I'm not sure the system will be able to extract you from the combat space in time if you take it head on. If you value your life, yield now." Her hair drifted weightlessly in the wind. "I don't want unnecessary damage," she continued, her tone still, detached. "But if by some chance you survive this strike," the glow in her eyes intensified, "I'll admit my loss." She raised her hand. Every spectator watching the projection felt their throats tighten. Even Michael had a solemn expression on his face now. Whatever she was preparing, it wasn't something a rank 2 should have been capable of. Chapter 648, Her Law, Her Defeat. A Hungry Undead, 3. Last day of the month. Requesting votes. In battles he could manage on his own, Michael had a habit of relying on himself. It was a habit he knew carried both advantages and drawbacks. Michael wasn't against using his undead. His talent just made it so he hadn't gotten used to the point like other necromancers. He was heavily dependent on his undead. But there was one thing Michael never compromised on. If the situation demanded it, he would not hesitate to call upon his undead. The instant a blinding light erupted from Rin, who now somewhat radiated the aura of an epic-grade artifact, Michael made his decision. Without delay, he summoned his rank 3 undead. A blinding light erupted from Rin's outstretched hands the very moment Michael began summoning. It wasn't just bright, it was absolute. The kind of radiance that swallowed everything. The beam surged forward like a pillar of divine wrath, roaring across the space with the force of a collapsing star. For a heartbeat, the entire combat space was drowned in brilliance, as though someone had dropped the sun into the arena. Michael barely caught a glimpse of it before everything went white. The undead he had just brought forth was instantly engulfed. From the viewing hall, all anyone could see on the projection was a wall of light consuming the arena. The sound lagged behind the visual, and when it finally reached them, it was a thunderous, bone-deep roar that rattled the foundations of the hall. Inside the combat space, the radiance showed no signs of fading. Through the blinding glow, a single silhouette could still be seen: Rin, standing at the center of her own storm, her silver body gleaming like a divine statue, both arms extended as runes flared into existence around her. Her voice, though faintly distorted, carried through the devastation. "This is my strongest strike," she said, tone calm and cold. "If you survive this, Michael Norman, I'll acknowledge your victory." The light grew even brighter, and then something within it moved. Down below, through the suffocating brilliance, a faint shadow began to take form. At first, it was barely visible, nothing more than a silhouette against the flood of white. But then it started to grow. The audience gasped as the image on the viewing screen adjusted, refocusing on the center of the light. What emerged from the haze wasn't Michael. A figure was rising from the ground slowly, steadily, its outline expanding with each passing heartbeat. When the glare finally eased just enough for the cameras to focus, they saw her. A female form. Her skin was a pale, ashen gray with a faint metallic sheen, and her body was growing larger by the second, casting a long shadow through the glow. But that wasn't what drew everyone's attention. It was her mouth, wide open unnaturally so, her jaw stretched inhumanly, as she faced the blinding beam descending from Rin. And she was swallowing it. The crowd froze. Not one word escaped their lips. The woman no. The creature was devouring the light itself. Every surge of brilliance that struck her was absorbed, the energy funneling straight into her widening form. She's eating it? Someone finally whispered in disbelief. The radiant field that had consumed the entire arena began to shrink, dimming bit by bit, drawn toward that gaping void of a mouth. Rin's eyes flickered, confusion breaking through her calm exterior for the first time. She couldn't process what she was seeing. It truly wasn't an everyday event where one's attack is being devoured as though it were nothing more than mist. And as the light faded, the monstrous silhouette became clearer. A towering female undead now stood in the center of the arena. Her head tilted slightly, and a low, deep sound escaped her throat. As for Michael, he was nowhere to be found. That was tasty. Do you have more? Rin's body trembled. Her vision flickered, the world spinning as her consciousness began to fade. But before darkness claimed her, she forced herself to activate one last scan. Her vision blurred, the system barely responding as the target locked. In Undead Titan level 63, her pupils shrank. Level 63? The thought barely formed before her body gave out. The radiant light around her dimmed completely, and the silver sheen of her transformed body began to fade. The mechanical armor that had once encased her crumbled away, and, with it, her strength. Even the remnants of her uniform were gone. Her human form returned, pale and fragile. Rin began to fall, but before her body could hit the ground, a shadow flashed through. The light, a hand caught her midair. Michael. In a single smooth motion, he draped a robe around her body and landed gently on the cracked stone floor. His eyes flicked toward the towering undead still looming in the distance. "Good job," he muttered quietly, eyes narrowing. "But that's enough." The undead titan lowered its head obediently. Michael's eyes remained narrowed. From the connection he shared with Lily, he could feel an intense hunger radiating through there. Bond one directed at Rin's body. It was a first for him. Even though Lily had become a glutton after advancing to rank 3, her appetite had always been focused on devouring law seeds. That was also the reason behind her current high level. She had almost completely digested the immense energy within those seeds. But this time was different. Even after Michael had issued a command to stand down, the hunger didn't fade. It lingered, pulsing with a strange, primal craving. Michael wasn't worried, though. Lily was still absolutely obedient. But the reaction made him more curious about the unconscious girl in his arms. When they first met, he had sensed the overflowing energy within her. But their recent battle confirmed it. This girl was far from ordinary. Still, there was one thing Michael couldn't deny. She was powerful. Compared to her, even Brian seemed insignificant. "No wonder she's the disciple of the vice principal," he murmured, his voice calm but thoughtful. "To matter in the eyes of a rank 5 being, there's no way you can be ordinary." Chapter 649 Conclusion. Surprisingly, outside the combat space, the entire hall was silent. The battle between the top 2 first years had been too shocking, leaving everyone speechless as they tried to process what they had witnessed. Was it the overwhelming power of the mysterious Michael Norman, the so-called Necromancer? Or was it the astonishing strength of the vice principal's disciple, Rin Halvain? Her class was uncommon, so much so that even many senior students had never heard of it. Yet, the power she displayed was far beyond what anyone expected from a first-year student. Who were these two? And why were they so strong? And that undead, what was it? At first, most of the uninformed students assumed the undead was one of Michael's rumored rank 3 summons. But when they noticed the expressions of the other first years who had participated in the 3rd round of the entrance exams with Michael change, they realized something was wrong. When they asked around, they discovered that this was a completely new undead. Which meant, if the rumors were true and by now, everyone knew they were, Michael Norman had at least 3 rank 3 undead. That was already more than some senior necromancers possessed. But what truly made this unbelievable was that Michael had only been awakened for 4 months. How did he achieve his current strength in such a short time? What would he become in a year? Everyone knew that for a rank 2 Necromancer to possess even one rank 3 undead was incredibly difficult. The rituals required to increase the success rate were also complex and expensive. That was because rank 3 creatures carried great significance. Not everyone was like Michael, whose mana capacity exceeded that of most rank 3 creatures, whose elemental affinity was absurd, and who possessed a demigod tier constitution that allowed him to touch upon the essence of laws to be instinctively affected by it. With those advantages, he could turn rank 3 beings into undead far more easily than others. The only other method was to have an undead comprehend a law on its own, but the difficulty of that was obvious. Still, with 3 rank 3 undead under his command, as long as Michael had patience and invested the right resources, it was only a matter of time before he gained 3 peak rank 3 undead. And that was without considering their potential for leveling up. Unlike some students whose strength peaked early, Michael Norman's power was only just beginning to grow. Even if he relied solely on his undead, he would continue to rise. If he managed to comprehend a law before graduation, he would not just be one of the strongest students in the academy, he would be one of the most powerful individuals in all of Aurora. In a corner, Rin sat quietly, his expression unreadable. His usual sharpness was nowhere to be found, replaced by a calm that surprised even himself. Beside him, Kieran, who always had something witty or mocking to say, was silent as well. His eyes remained fixed on the fading image of the combat space, where Michael stood holding Rin. He didn't even attempt to taunt Rin this time. His sister's strength exceeded his own. She was a prodigy, a genius, and if even she couldn't match that Necromancer, what right did he have to laugh? Kieran's gaze dropped slightly. Rin's eyes remained on the pillar in the center area. The moment his sister started falling, the instructor had turned off the projection much to his pleasure. Rin thought he would be angry, but instead he felt something closer to acceptance. His sister had given her all. Even if he wanted to deny it, the result was clear for everyone to see. Michael Norman was simply beyond anything they had expected. If even she couldn't do anything against him, Rin said softly, then refusing to accept it would only make me look like a loser. He leaned back slightly, exhaling. She did her best. That's enough. Kieran turned toward him, faintly surprised by how calm he looked. You're not angry? Rin's lips curved slightly, though it wasn't quite a smile. Anger doesn't change reality. And reality, he said, glancing back toward the pillar, is that a monster walks among us. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The rest of the students around them whispered and speculated in disbelief, but the two remained silent. Rin's calm was the calm of a man who had accepted his place. Kieran's silence was the silence of someone who had finally seen something beyond arrogance, something that made him realize how vast the gap between genius and monstrosity truly was. Still, Kieran finally muttered under his breath, I wonder what that guy will become in a few years. Rin didn't answer. The silence that had settled over the combat hall lingered for a few seconds more before a sharp voice cut through it. That's enough. Everyone, clear out. It was Instructor Yara. Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried authority that left no room for argument. The murmurs died instantly as students turned toward her. She stood with her arms crossed. Though the projection had already been dimmed, Yara had seen enough in those last few moments before shutting it down: the state of Rin's body, the fragments of armor peeling away, and her uniform disintegrating as the fusion effect ended. She trusted Michael not because she believed in his morals, but because of where they were. Still, as a woman and an instructor, she felt a twist of discomfort. The rank contest is over. Michael Norman is now top one of the first years for 2 months, she said firmly. You've seen enough. Everyone. Now. The command broke the crowd's trance. Slowly, students still whispering in awe and disbelief as they shuffled toward the exits. That wasn't even his full power, was it? I think Instructor Yara closed it because of Rin's armor. She's going to be fine, right? Michael Norman. That guy's not normal. For real. Chapter 650 Undead Scholars 1. After the hall finally emptied, the combat space shimmered faintly and both participants were extracted. Two beams of soft white light materialized near the center of the hall. When the glow faded, Michael and Rin appeared on the platform. Rin's body was still limp, her breathing shallow but stable. Michael, on the other hand, was standing straight, calm as always. The long robe that had been covering Rin was still wrapped around her. Yara stepped forward immediately, her boots echoing against the marble floor. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said, her voice even but edged with restraint. "You did well, Michael Norman, but from here on, I'll handle things." Michael gave a simple nod. But before he could speak, Yara held out her hand. "The robe stays." Michael didn't argue. With a small shrug, he made his way out of the combat hall. Since he was top one again, Michael's rights to the villa were returned to him. When he arrived and stepped inside after greeting the elves outside in the compound, he noticed the villa was largely unchanged. In fact, there was no change at all. Michael was slightly surprised and wondered why that was the case. Was it because the previous occupant could only hold the top spot for such a short while, or because they simply didn't bother to make any changes, thinking they wouldn't be able to keep it for long? He wasn't sure. The latter reasoning didn't seem entirely solid, especially considering the power Rin had shown. Against other rank 2 necromancers, she might have easily maintained her position even if others had their own law. After all, she had her own law too. That fact made Michael feel a bit jealous. Even though he had several law seeds on hand and already possessed a clear understanding of how laws worked enough to start comprehending one if he wished he couldn't, he simply hadn't found a law that suited him. It was hard to explain. Some law seeds resonated with him quite well, and while it wouldn't have been much of a disadvantage to copy one of them, none felt perfect. They didn't fit. If anything, those law seeds, instead of advancing his law comprehension progress, it only deepened his elemental affinity, while granting him more spells and skills. The sudden disappearance he had performed back in the combat hall was actually the result of one of those skills, something he had learned from a law seed 2 days earlier. Earth Escape. Though it was technically a skill, Michael suspected it was closer to a law-type ability. Even with his abundant mana, it caused him noticeable strain. If it felt that taxing to him, then for anyone else it would likely serve as a last resort trump card. The way the skill worked was quite fascinating. When activated, Earth Escape allowed Michael to merge with the ground, moving through soil and stone as though they were liquid. Inside, though, the sensation was strange. His body felt weightless, almost formless, as if he had become one with the earth around him. It wasn't perfect, however. The deeper or denser the material he moved through, the greater the strain on his body. The mana consumption was far higher than what a rank 2 should comfortably handle. It felt like an escape technique at its core, a way to flee instantly when overwhelmed. But it could also serve as a surprise maneuver in combat, letting him shift position and reappear behind or beneath an opponent. That was what intrigued Michael most. Used properly, Earth Escape could become a terrifying movement. Skill, one that blurred the line between evasion and attack. Still, he doubted most people could use it that way. Even he could only maintain it briefly. It was a spell suited for those with overwhelming reserves, people like him. Yet, realistically speaking, it was the kind of ability only strong rank 3 creatures could use freely. Among supernaturals, those who could perform something similar were usually mages, whose mana reserves were usually greater. Thinking of his skill, Michael couldn't help but have another thought. If there's an Earth Escape skill, I wonder if other elements have the same thing. It wasn't impossible. If there was an Earth Escape, then there might also be skills like Water Escape. Still, Michael shook his head lightly at the thought later. Thinking about escape skills one after another made him realize how absurd it sounded for his current stage. At rank 2, flight was already achievable. Once a supernatural reached that point, the reliance on escape techniques drastically decreased. Why tunnel through the ground when you could simply take to the skies? That thought made him chuckle quietly. Yet, the humor faded just as fast, replaced by practicality. The Earth Escape skill might be redundant, but it was still valuable. After all, the speed of the technique far surpassed flying. It was instantaneous, more like a short-range teleportation than movement. When he used it, even spiritual senses had a hard time tracking him. In certain situations, that made it far more useful than simple flight. "Better to have it than not," Michael murmured, a faint smile tugging at his lips. The next few weeks of Michael's life in the academy passed uneventfully. He attended classes where he learned several languages and supernatural subjects while gradually getting used to his newfound fame. Thanks to his abundant academy points, which he used to purchase advanced knowledge materials, combined with his natural talents, Michael was starting to resemble an actual mage, one with real academic grounding and skill. To test his progress, he decided to rent a private combat room in the combat hall, one equipped with its own space for battle simulations. Though the rental fee was quite high, Michael didn't hesitate. He wanted to gauge his growth. He fought Spartan there, and though he lost in the end, he was satisfied with the result. There was also a reason why he lost. Spartan, what does Gyo though you min mean? Yes. At some point, Michael had actually summoned his rank 3 undead to study with him. Chapter 651 Elves. Initially, this wasn't supposed to have happened. It all began the day the villa systems fully adjusted to Michael's presence. Every villa owned by a top-ranking student had its own adaptive system that attuned itself to the owner's mana signature. When the system synchronized with Michael, it immediately began to shift. The temperature dropped slightly. The lighting dimmed, settling into a soft gray hue that cast long, thin shadows against the walls. Even the gentle warmth that most villas maintained was replaced by a crisp chill that clung faintly to the skin. To Michael, it was perfect. He felt relaxed the moment he stepped in. The cool air reminded him of calm nights in Thornvale. The stillness soothed his thoughts, allowing his mind to drift easily into concentration. But to others, it was the opposite. When one of the elves working outside the villa entered, it immediately started trembling slightly. The air, to it, was heavy, and it felt as if it had stepped into a place where something watched silently from the dark. The change wasn't something Michael did consciously. The system simply adapted to the nature of his mana. To him, the environment felt cool and peaceful. To everyone else, it felt dark, cold, and eerie. As a result, none of the villa attendants lingered more than necessary. Even Lyra visited him only a few times. That was how it all began. Though perfectly happy with the surroundings, Michael, who was just shedding his mortal self, was still partly a social creature. Since he could not ask anyone to stay with him in the villa, though most students would likely not refuse even with its eerie atmosphere, who else was better than his own undead? Before the day the thought came, Michael, who had multiple times gone into the spatial space within the damaged coffin of the Forgotten, had not only interacted in whatever way he could with his existing undead, but had also evolved a few. As he wasn't exactly looking for companionship, but rather to make his residence feel less empty, Michael brought out quite a few of his undead to stay in the villa with him. With the villa adapting perfectly to its owner and transforming into something that suited a necromancer's nature far too well, his undead, whose intelligence could mimic emotion to a certain extent, were satisfied with the atmosphere. And so it began. Life with Michael and his undead in a supernatural academy. "Gyo though you min," Spartan repeated slowly, his deep voice echoing slightly. "It means, the moon watches those who wander." Michael nodded faintly, glancing down at the notes spread across the table in his study room. He already knew the answer but wanted to make sure his memory hadn't slipped. He had just reopened his notes after a long day and decided to test himself. "Good," he murmured. "I remembered correctly. The academy curriculum placed great emphasis on language. Communication was also important in the supernatural world, and words sometimes carried weight far beyond mere speech. So among various subjects, language studies were considered one of the most important. 3 languages were compulsory for every student: Elven, Dragonic, and the Universal Tongue. Michael had picked up most of the Universal Tongue quickly. His intelligence stat was so high that, if he wanted to, he could probably learn an entire language within a day. But some languages were different and special. The Elven and Dragonic languages had layers beyond simple speech or written form. They each possessed what scholars called incantation speech, ancient words imbued with will, capable of shaping the world around them. Michael found that fascinating. It wasn't something that could be memorized like normal vocabulary. These languages were alive. Each word carried meaning and essence. When spoken with intent, even a single syllable could ripple through the surrounding mana and twist reality slightly. Ordinary people couldn't even handle looking at the deeper runes of these languages. Just glimpsing one of their symbols for too long could cause fainting or induce hallucinations. In the worst cases, the strain could damage the mind permanently. For supernaturals, the danger was different but no less real. That was why comprehension mattered. These incantation languages couldn't be learned through repetition or memorization. They had to be understood. Each student's comprehension of these tongues varied depending on their talent, comprehension, and affinity. Some could barely manage a few harmless words. Michael, with his intelligence and mana sensitivity, had no problem learning the surface forms of the languages. He could already read and write fluently, though his elven pronunciation was far from graceful. But he was cautious about going deeper. Spartan closed the book in front of him with a low thud. "Your tone was off, master," he said bluntly. Michael blinked, then sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "So, not convincing, huh?" "Not at all," Spartan replied with absolute seriousness. "If an elf heard you speak like that, they might stab you out of mercy." Michael chuckled under his breath. For special speech like the elven incantation tongue, pronunciation mattered more than most realized. Even if one got the words right, the accent carried power. The flow, tone, and rhythm of the syllables determined how much will the world recognized in the speaker's words. If the accent was wrong, the spell would still work, but it would lose precision, harmony, and strength. However, a refined accent made the same incantation flow more naturally with the surrounding mana, cleaner, sharper, and more efficient. Spartan wasn't lying when he mocked Michael's elven speech earlier. The academy didn't just teach languages for communication, it also taught about the races that used them or about particular races in general. Michael had studied enough to know how true Spartans' words were. The elves were not just one of the top races in the known universe. They ranked among the top 10. They weren't number one, but their influence stretched wide across multiple star systems. Their home world, Alarion, was as vast as Aurora itself, yet its mana density was several times greater. Even newborn elves were born with mana sensitivity close to that of a rank 1 human supernatural. Chapter 652 Scholar Spartan. The only thing Aurora's civilization could confidently boast about compared to them was population and technology. Aurora's advancement in Magitech made it difficult to suppress, even for stronger and older races. They might not have the same raw power or longevity as the elves, but their sheer technological progression placed them among the few civilizations that couldn't easily be bullied. Putting all this aside, a notable feature of the elves was that they were proud. Very proud. It wasn't the kind of arrogance born from ignorance but the quiet, deeply rooted pride of a people who had long surpassed the need for validation. Their elegance wasn't a show. It was part of their nature. Michael remembered his instructor's warning. To converse with an elf is to dance with etiquette itself. Even silence can offend them if it lacks grace. He had laughed back then, thinking it exaggerated, but further studies showed it was true. It was like their obsession with beautiful things. They saw beauty as something elegant and graceful. They also had a definition for what was not beautiful. To them, it was a fault in the pattern of the world that ought to be corrected. That thought alone was offensive to most races. The elves did not care. They believed beauty was grace aligned with purpose. If a thing could not be refined into grace, it was unworthy. If a people could not be guided into grace, they were to be removed. They called it pruning. Aurora humans were not exactly their taste, yet many could fit within elven aesthetics. That was one reason that, when Aurora first stepped into the wider universe, the elves were among their first friends. The elven race in the universe also belonged to the neutral good category of races. Peaceful, some called the elves, but Michael and many others thought otherwise. Truly, They could be called peaceful compared to some races, but a truly peaceful race would not cleanse a conquered world because its natives were, in their words, hostile to elegance. The elves had done so more than once. To the elves, this was a good deed. The world was neater afterward. Michael had seen images of some of the cleansed races, and though he wouldn't deny they were beautiful in their own ways, none of that beauty warranted death. In any case, this also showed that Spartan hadn't lied. For a race that valued elegance to the level of obsession, if Michael were to insult their ancient language with his rough accent, he might genuinely get stabbed. Most people didn't even dare use the elven incantation speech in front of elves unless they were fluent enough to sound like one of them. To the elves, their language wasn't just communication. It was their heritage. To butcher it with clumsy pronunciation was to desecrate it, and that was something they would never tolerate. Fortunately, there were no elves around. The ones cleaning the villa didn't count. Michael lowered his notes and gave Spartan a long, puzzled look. "All right," he said slowly, tilting his head. "Why exactly are you dressed like that?" Spartan blinked, expression unreadable behind the round glasses perched on his nose. The undead sat there in full black robes he had specifically asked permission to take from Michael's wardrobe, and his long hair was neatly slicked back with a faint sheen of cream and tied into a ponytail. The sight was something. Michael stared for a few seconds longer, struggling to decide whether to laugh or question his own sanity. "You look like a professor," he finally said. Spartan adjusted his glasses calmly. "Appearance shapes perception, master. If I am to study languages, I must look the part." "Did you learn that from the texts?" "Yes, master." Michael's mouth twitched. "You're an undead." "Yes," Spartan said simply, as though that explained nothing and everything at once. Truth be told, this wasn't even the first time Spartan had shown up dressed like that. Lately, it had become his preferred look. And while Michael had long since accepted his undead behaving more like eccentric subordinates than mindless minions, this one took a good part of the cake. The reason Spartan had started reading in the first place was because Michael had tried to save time. Using his skill, impart knowledge, he had given Spartan access to study materials from the academy, so the undead could learn and help him summarize them later. He had also given Spartan a skill module called Scouting IA, technique Michael used to bypass the monochrome vision that undead suffered from. It allowed them to perceive color and light, albeit faintly, like they were suffering from mild blindness. Michael had thought everything would make Spartan a good study assistant. What he hadn't expected was that his undead would suddenly develop preferences. From the moment Spartan experienced color, his behavior subtly changed. He started caring about several things and even aesthetics. When reading, he always adjusted the lamps to cast soft golden light instead of bright white, saying something like it set the mood. What mood? Michael didn't know. When moving around, Spartan also cleaned up after himself meticulously, ensuring the study always looked organized. Now, he read for pleasure as well. And not just any books. He seemed obsessed with languages and interspecies culture. The library of the villa had started to fill with texts from other civilizations. Fortunately, Aurora wasn't like some other civilizations where knowledge was restricted. A lot of things were free to access from the academy, and the ones Michael had to buy with his points he did as long as they were cheap. In any case, his undead's knowledge was his as well. Michael sighed softly, watching his undead adjust his collar like a scholar preparing for a lecture. "You know, Spartan," he said finally, "if you start asking me for tea next, I might actually worry." Spartan looked thoughtful. "Would that be appropriate for study sessions, master?" Michael blinked. "Forget I said anything." The undead nodded solemnly and went back to reading, flipping the page with surprising gentleness. Michael rubbed his temple, shaking his head. It was moments like this that made him wonder if his undead were growing a little too fast. Chapter 653 Twin Earrings. And it actually was not only Spartan who was like this. "Blue Purple, you two should slow down on the mana drain, please," Michael said aloud to what appeared to be empty air. At least that was what it looked like. On both sides of his ears were butterfly-shaped earrings, one blue and one purple. They looked quite feminine, but on Michael's handsome self, they created a unique charm. If not for the fact that he seemed perfectly straight or rather uninterested in either gender, people might have called him the younger version of a certain director. When the two heard their names, they flew away from Michael's ears to his table, transforming into two miniature humanoid females. One had blue hair, the other purple, and both wore gowns that matched their colors. Their clothes looked incredibly real, but Michael knew they were merely illusions. Yes, it was blue and purple. One had once been an undead platform morpho, and the other an undead spicebush swallowtail moth. At least that was what they were before. Now, not only were they 3-star extraordinary rank creatures, they had also reached rank 3. Blue had evolved into an undead phantasm morpho, while purple had become an undead mirage swallowtail. Their laws, like every other law Michael had seen, fascinated him deeply. Blue's law was called the law of reflected reality, which was connected to the greater law of light. Its reasoning was that illusion, mirage, and reflection all stem from the manipulation of light. Without light, there can be no vision, no reflection, no appearance, and thus no illusion. It was an interesting concept that also granted Blue an equally interesting effect. With this law, Blue could project mirror realities around itself, turning perception into a tangible force. The concept behind it was simple. Every illusion is a reflection of belief. The more a target believes, the stronger the illusion becomes. To put it simply, the law inverted perception. What looked fake became real, and what looked real became illusion. Unlike before, when Blue's means were purely illusion, this time his abilities could affect the mind as well. Purple, who was also an illusion beast, possessed a law that seemed to share some similarities but was distinct in its own way. Purple's law was the law of false manifestation, which was related to the greater law of reality. Its reasoning was that to manifest the unreal and give it form is to tamper with the boundary between what is and what is not, the very essence of reality. While the law of light governs what can be seen, the law of reality governs what exists. False manifestation draws from that same foundation, mimicking reality itself, but imperfectly, like a shadow imitating the real. This law allowed Purple to create illusions that interacted physically for a few seconds, forming illusionary chains, blades, or wings. The concept behind it was simple. To see is to summon, and what one perceives, even falsely, gains existence. Michael leaned back slightly in his chair, his eyes shifting between the two tiny figures. The two were opposites in temperament but similar in essence. Blue's energy was calm and patient. Purple was curious and, due to constantly testing her ability, unconsciously mischievous. Low-rank undead were usually stationary, but as they advanced in strength, even if they stayed in one place, they were constantly growing stronger whether consciously or subconsciously. And as beings without moral restraint or emotion, they often did the most extreme things. If an undead without a master knew that blood made it stronger, it would seek blood at any cost, without limit. But those were the ways of wild undead. Even undead who had lost their masters and were at a high level were not always so reckless. Of course, much depended on their location and the nature of their past master. If no one stronger than them existed in a place, only the heavens knew what they would do. Michael had spent a great deal of time testing their laws after their evolution. He found the results both fascinating. When he had first asked Blue to use her law, he hadn't noticed anything unusual at first. It was only when he realized that, in the eyes of others, he didn't exist even as he stood right before them that he understood something was wrong. It was as if she hadn't created an illusion but an alternate truth. Michael theorized that the law of reflected reality didn't just bend light, it manipulated perception at a fundamental level. It was a frightening ability. If Blue used her full strength, even high-rank creatures could lose all sense of what was real or false. Their own instincts would betray them. Purple's law, on the other hand, was even more unpredictable. Her law of false manifestation was less subtle, but far more aggressive. When he tested it the first time, she had created a glowing spear made of translucent energy and hurled it toward a wall he created with magic. To his astonishment, the spear didn't simply vanish, it struck the wall and left a small dent before fading. It wasn't real, not truly, yet for that brief moment, it had existed. He realized then that while Blue's law manipulated the observer's mind, Purple's law manipulated the world's acknowledgement of form. One fooled the senses, the other fooled existence. That distinction fascinated him the most. As for the mana drain Michael had mentioned earlier, it was actually a skill they had gained after evolving. The ability allowed them to draw mana directly from a target, either to weaken it or to store the energy for later use. Surprisingly, though, both Blue and Purple had extremely low mana reserves compared to other rank 3 creatures of their level. That was what made the ability necessary in the first place. "Return to your former forms," Michael said to the two undead. They both obeyed. Their tiny bodies shimmered, scattering into glowing motes of light that swirled through the air. The motes converged again beside his ears, solidifying into 2 elegant butterfly-shaped earrings. Chapter 654 Interesting Villa. Just as Michael was about to continue studying, a loud crashing sound echoed through the villa. It was so sudden that the books on his desk trembled slightly and a faint vibration ran through the floor. Normally, such a noise would have drawn an immediate reaction to Michael because it was his residence, and Spartan because of his duty to protect his master, but neither even looked up. Michael calmly turned a page. Spartan did not blink, his finger following the line of text as though nothing had happened. They both already knew what the cause was. Somewhere in the villa, likely near the kitchen area, Lucky and Lily were up to something again, probably another one of their culinary experiments. Michael exhaled softly through his nose, a mix of amusement and resignation flickering in his expression. The last time he had checked on them, the two had been trying to cook what Lucky called a dish. Lucky's strange obsession with tasting grass had started long ago. Back when Michael first revived him, the wolf-like undead had the odd habit of chewing on grass. But the moment Lucky realized ordinary grass had no flavor, he stopped. Perhaps it would have ended there. But Michael, recalling that old habit one day, decided to give the creature a treat. He had found some low-tier soulgrass, plants that grew naturally in old cemeteries where magic beasts were buried, listed in the school catalog. The quality of soulgrass varied depending on the strength of the creatures buried beneath it. The higher the grade, the greater its effect on undead. Michael had only purchased the lowest grade, thinking it would be harmless. It was useless for cultivation, but he thought it might let Lucky finally taste something again. That was how the cycle began. Lucky did not ask for more verbally, but through their spiritual connection, Michael could constantly feel a faint tug. It was a soft, persistent yearning, like a dull ache echoing from the bond they shared. That sensation was impossible to ignore, as they were also very close to each other, and as his undead, their feelings were transparent to him. From then on, every few days, he would toss a few sprigs of low-grade soul grass to the creature. But the simple treats evolved into something stranger. With Lily joining in, their experiments grew frequent and loud. Michael sighed and finally looked up from his book, glancing in the direction of the noise. "They're at it again," he muttered. Spartan did not even lift his eyes. "Shall I intervene, Master?" "No," Michael said, leaning back in his chair. "Let them play, as long as they don't blow up the kitchen again." There was a brief pause, then another distant crash. "They might blow up the kitchen again," Spartan said flatly. Michael rubbed his temple. "I know." Still, he did not move. Whatever mess they caused would be temporary. His undead, troublesome as they were part of what made the villa feel alive, if that was the right word for it. However, though he did not move, his senses still spread through the whole villa as he checked up on everything. In the kitchen, the source of the chaos revealed itself. Inside a cauldron-like pot was a bubbling, faintly luminous liquid, an odd mixture of black and green that hissed like boiling tar. Floating within it were several strands of black grass. A fine-looking young man, seemingly in his late 20s, stood over the cauldron wearing an apron that had clearly suffered better days. His long hair was tied loosely behind his head, and despite the faint scorch marks on his sleeve, this was Lucky, one of Michael's oldest undead. Beside him stood a tall, beautiful woman, Lily. The pair looked like an eccentric couple in the middle of a domestic experiment. Truth be told, The two made an oddly fitting pair. Lucky, ever since his early revival, had carried that strange fascination with taste and scent, perhaps some remnant instinct from his beast form. Meanwhile, Lily, whose appetite bordered on gluttony, had discovered a shared interest in what Lucky called soul cuisine, one obsessed over flavor, the other over the sensation of devouring. Together, they had found something close to friendship, or whatever the undead equivalent of that was. The cauldron rattled as bubbles burst from its surface, releasing faint wisps of mist. Lucky leaned closer. Perfect. This is it, Lily. The aroma of true soul essence. Undead could not smell, but anything that had an effect on the soul could be felt. Their experiments existed for one simple reason: to enhance the feeling. Lucky, even as an undead, retained a faint echo of instinct from his days as a living creature. The undead version of him did not crave food or taste in the physical sense. Yet somewhere in the depths of his soul, the impulse persisted. He simply wanted to feel again, to experience the sensation of consuming, even if it was illusionary. Every time he ate, his soul flickered faintly, as though responding to the act itself. The stronger the sensation, the more vivid that flicker became. It was not hunger. It was the soul trying to remember what it was to live. Lily, on the other hand, was a completely different story. Her law made her nature as an undead an apex devourer. If not for the spiritual bindings of her master, she could have easily become one of those catastrophic undead, the kind that consumes entire cities simply to feel full. A being like her, left unchecked, could start a calamity without meaning to. But Michael understood this better than anyone. Unlike many summoners or necromancers who viewed their undead as tools, Michael treated his creations as intelligent beings. To him, if an undead could think, reason, and act, then it was alive in a sense. That was why, instead of suppressing their instincts completely, he let them find safer alternatives. Lucky's desire to taste, Lily's hunger for essence. If these urges could be redirected into something harmless, like cooking, then it was better for everyone. And so, the bizarre culinary sessions began. Michael did not entirely understand how they came up with half their recipes, but he had to admit, it was cheaper than the alternative of Lily accidentally eating another elf. Now, the villa's kitchen had become their experimental domain. Soulgrass, crushed mana stones, and even diluted spirit liquid lined the shelves. And while the other villa residents would have found such a scene disturbing, to Michael, it was strangely comforting. Like this, several days passed in a flash. It was already the last month of the year and 6 months since Michael's awakening. Chapter 655 Princess. A lot had happened in these 6 months. In Aurora, Michael had not only awakened but fully integrated into this new world. The once foreign air of Aurora no longer felt alien. It was his world. Now, and beyond Aurora, there was still another world, the land of origin. There, Michael had lived through his first true brush with death, and after a series of events that led him to become incredibly powerful, he had grown to the extent where he could decide the life and death of people. Currently, it was a bright, clear day in Thornvale. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Michael's study, casting golden lines across the polished wooden floor. Inside the quiet room, Michael sat behind his desk, a cup of steaming tea in front of him. Before him stood 2 figures, Ace and Leah. Compared to how they once were, the change in both was striking, especially Ace. His once rough look had sharpened into something else. His blonde hair, now streaked with faint lines of black, fell past his shoulders. His physique was tall and defined, and a calm gaze settled in his green eyes. Ace now looked quite noble. Michael's gaze lingered on him briefly. It had been months since the day he merged his own blood with Ace's and turned him into a blood servant. Back then, the act had caused a stir throughout the manor. Even without proof, everyone knew he was responsible. But none dared to question him. That was one of the things Michael loved about the land of origin. Here, power dictated everything. As long as one was strong enough, no one asked why. Unlike in Aurora, where every action was weighed, judged, and monitored by unseen eyes and powerful forces, The land of origin was raw and honest in its brutality. If one had power, they had freedom. Here, Michael could do as he pleased. Beside Ace stood Leah. Compared to how he first looked months ago, Leah too had changed, but compared to Ace, Leah was quite lacking. After finding out about his merge option, Michael had also wanted to do the same for Leah but later decided against it and wanted to wait until Leah awakened his life seed. Michael acknowledged that the cultivation path was strong, but compared to the resources he could give a cultivator, he had enough abundance of resources to support a knight. Michael did not have clear favoritism between the two boys, but to others it seemed like he did. These past few months, Leah had overworked himself not only in training but also in his duties. Michael could only smile helplessly at the effort to gain his favor, but unfortunately, he was not about to turn back on his plan. He also quite saw Leah as an unstable fellow. Though becoming a blood servant would make Leah extremely loyal to him, he would still be someone with strong thoughts. His revenge was still deep within him, and though Michael did not want to remove it completely, he preferred it to be under control. These few months seemed to have had an effect, and Leah was calmer now. Just the fact that he no longer seemed to resent Michael was enough proof. Michael pretended not to notice anything. In any case, what would come would surely come. Michael let the silence sit for a breath, then looked from Ace to Leah. "What did you come for?" Ace bowed slightly. "Another baron has brought a gift, my lord." The word carried weight. Michael did not smile outwardly but did on the inside. A few months ago, he had paid a certain knight a cordial visit. After an exchange of pleasant words, the man had offered a generous pile of resources to tighten their bond. Michael had not called on anyone else after that day, yet the group had learned its lesson. Every once in a while, batches of gifts came. Since they felt joy as they gave the gifts, they could not do it all at once due to the quantity. But there were always some bad eggs everywhere. Out of the 7 people under him, 2 knights and 5 barons, there were 2 barons in particular who did not respond to him. Instead, it seemed they had gotten even closer to a certain count. Michael was just about to habitually ask what gifts came this time, when a knock came on the door to his study. "Come in," Michael said without raising his voice. The door opened, and a familiar figure stepped through. It was Captain Rohan, the head of Michael's personal guard and the commander of Thornvale's defense units. Normally composed, the man now looked oddly uneasy. Rohan entered, bowed deeply, and waited for permission to speak. Michael gestured slightly with his hand, granting it. "What's the matter?" The captain straightened, his voice steady but quick. "My lord, messenger just arrived from the southern road. The Duke's daughter will soon reach the manor." Michael's hand paused mid-movement, the cup of tea hovering an inch from his lips. "Which Duke's daughter?" he asked to make sure. "Princess Ariane, my lord, youngest daughter of Duke Evermoon," he said respectfully with a bow. Michael set the cup down slowly, his gaze still fixed on Rohan. "How far is she from the manor?" Rohan straightened, still slightly tense. "Not far, my lord. She arrived aboard an airship that landed just past the southern ridge. They seem to be resting for now, but judging by the escort's movements, I estimate they'll be here within the hour." "An hour?" Michael repeated softly, then stood. His presence alone filled the room. "Then what are we waiting for?" His sharp gaze swept across everyone present. "A duke's daughter is on her way here, and I don't intend for Thornvale to look unprepared." He turned to Ace and Leah. "You two make sure the manor looks presentable, and have the cooks prepare something fitting for a noble guest. If it cannot be extravagant, make it tasteful." Both men bowed immediately. "Understood, my lord," they said in unison. Then Michael looked to Rohan. "Send an escort to meet her halfway. You'll go with them to extend a proper welcome and guide her entourage safely here. Make sure the guards along the road stand at attention when she passes." "Yes, my lord," Rohan replied, bowing low before turning to leave. As the others hurried out to carry out their tasks, Michael remained by the window watching the sunlight over Thornvale. "The Duke's daughter," he murmured, his tone unreadable. "Rohan, A gentle voice called from a fancy-looking carriage. Yes, princess. Rohan, in armor and riding a horse, drew closer. Right now they were already close to Thornvale and could see its walls in the distance. The curtain of the carriage lifted slightly, revealing a young woman. Arian Evermoon, Duke Evermoon's youngest daughter, spoke with the same soft elegance that had made her famous across the capital. "How does your new lord treat you, Captain?" she asked lightly, her tone polite, but her gaze sharp enough that Rohan instinctively straightened in his saddle. He did not answer right away. For a moment the rhythmic sound of hooves filled the silence between them. His thoughts stirred. Though this lady was family to his former master, she was no longer his superior. His loyalty now belonged to the man waiting in Thornvale. Every word he spoke now mattered. Finally he replied, his voice even. "My lord, though new to ruling, has been quite exceptional," he said simply. A faint, almost imperceptible smile curved Arian's lips. "Exceptional?" she echoed. "Is that so?" Rohan nodded once. "Yes, princess." Arian's eyes drifted toward the distant outline of Thornvale's high walls, glinting faintly beneath the sun. Her voice, though calm, carried a note of curiosity. "I heard Thornvale was in quite a miserable state before he took over. A rich land left in disarray because of neglect and poor management. Tell me, Captain, how is it faring now?" Rohan hesitated only briefly before replying. "Better than before, Your Highness," he said simply, his tone measured and respectful. "Much better." "Oh." Arian tilted her head slightly, amusement flickering across her delicate features. Rohan thought that would be the end of it, that the young lady's curiosity had been satisfied. But the next question, delivered with the same soft tone yet carrying far deeper intent, made him choke. "I see," Arian murmured, her gaze fixed on the approaching walls of Thornvale. "Then tell me, Captain, has your new lord grown familiar with any woman during his time here?" Rohan nearly coughed on his own breath, tightening his grip on the reins as his horse gave a startled snort. "Princess?" he stammered before catching himself. Her expression did not change. She simply watched him with that serene, knowing look of hers. "It's a simple question," she said. Rohan's mind raced. Of all the things she could have asked, this was the one question he had not prepared for. His lordship has been entirely focused on his duties, princess," Rohan said quickly, straightening in his saddle as though posture might hide his panic. "He hasn't shown any particular interest of that kind, at least not that I'm aware of." Arian's smile deepened faintly, her tone light. "Not that you're aware of." Rohan swallowed. Chapter 656. Welcome to Thornvale. Without realizing it, Rohan's mind drifted toward his lord. The first thing that came to him was his lord's appearance. Handsome was far too plain a word to describe him. No, Michael was beyond that, beautiful even. Yet despite his almost delicate features, there was nothing feminine about him. His body was slender but held a quiet, masculine strength that made one forget his appearance entirely when he moved or spoke. Still, that beauty had caused no small amount of trouble within the territory. The Lord himself was unaware of it, but Rohan had seen enough to know. After their visit from that certain old night, Michael had begun to move more actively around Thornvale. It began with food, specifically, the sudden appearance of several tons of processed supplies deep in the forest. Even now, Rohan had no idea how it had been done. The goods looked too refined, too perfect, as if a powerful mage had personally grown them. He did not know, of course, that these goods came from Aurora, a world far beyond his understanding. Michael had been careful, concealing the item's origin with ordinary casings and simple packaging. But even so, their quality spoke volumes. Then there were the armors and weapons. The men who used them swore they felt lighter yet stronger than anything forged locally. Rohan had wondered more than once where his lord obtained them, but he never dared to ask. Perhaps if he were stronger, he might have risked curiosity. But he wasn't, and deep down, a quiet instinct told him that his lord's strength was beyond what any of them could measure. Whether he was still within the grand stage or already above it, Rohan couldn't say. But he had seen enough to know that Michael was not ordinary. Because of his lord, the territory thrived. Under his direction, Thornvale had begun to change faster than anyone expected. Roads were repaired, granaries filled, soldiers properly equipped, all within a few months. Yet for all his power, kindness, and efficiency, the trouble always circled back to his appearance. Once Michael started appearing more often in public, Thornvale's young women began to lose their composure. Rohan had caught servants gossiping about the Lord's eyes like glass, and smile that could make angels jealous. Some women went out of their way to wander near the manor gates just for a glimpse of him. And not only the young ones. Even a few older women were far more shameless than their daughters. It was chaos. Rohan's thoughts snagged on a notion. Could the princess have fallen into the same trap as the others? He kept his face blank and eyes forward, but he stole a careful glance at the carriage slit. Is it curiosity or interest? Rohan wondered. Or both? Rohan did not say anything, but the thought lingered in his mind. He would not be surprised if the princess had also been taken in by his lord's looks. If he were a woman himself, he might have been, too. The thought made him pause, and he quickly shook it away. Still, he could not deny that his lord possessed a charm that drew people in, whether they intended to be drawn or not. The escort continued onward. Before long, they reached the outer gates of Thornvale. When the carriage rolled to a slow stop, the princess pulled the curtain aside, peering out with curiosity. Her gaze swept over the surroundings, and the first thing she noticed was the cleanness. The streets were spotless, the stone walls freshly mended, and the soldiers patrolling looked sharp and disciplined. Then her attention shifted toward the people. There were far more of them than she had expected. There are quite a number of people here, Arian remarked softly, turning her gaze to Rohan. I thought Thornvale was sparsely populated? Rohan bowed slightly from his saddle. The population has increased a bit, Your Highness. Nothing significant, he replied evenly. But inwardly, he could not help the faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. A bit, he thought. That's putting it mildly. The truth was, Thornvale's population had nearly doubled. The change had begun after the gifts offered by 5 of the lords under Michael. Each of them, seeking to recover their losses and regain favor, had sent not just resources but people. They had sold off their commoners, seeing them as mouths too costly to feed in such harsh times. But population was never the true issue. Wealth was. As long as one was rich, one could rebuild. Those same lords knew that when the next harvest of resources arrived, they would make back what they'd lost, even if now they had to give a share to Michael. Soon Rohan announced their arrival. He reined his horse to a stop before the gates of the manor and dismounted smoothly, the sunlight glinting off his polished armor. Turning toward the carriage, he stepped forward and bowed slightly. We've arrived, Princess, he said. The carriage door opened with a soft creak, and Rohan extended his hand. A moment later, Arian's slender fingers rested lightly in his palm as she stepped down. Her boots touched the stone path, and the faint scent of roses drifted in the breeze as she straightened her posture. But the moment her gaze lifted toward the manor gates, her breath caught. Standing there, sunlight spilling across him like molten gold, was Michael. He was not in fancy clothing, yet somehow he appeared even more imposing than any knight she had seen. His attire was simple black and green, tailored perfectly to his form, but the way he carried himself radiated effortless authority. The faint breeze brushed his long, loose hair aside, revealing a face that could have been sculpted by the heavens. Michael stood with his hands clasped behind his back. The soldiers flanking the gate bowed deeply the instant she appeared, yet her attention barely registered them. Her eyes stayed fixed on the man before her. Michael's gaze met hers. For an instant, she felt as if he saw through her. It was unnerving, but strangely captivating. Rohan, oblivious to her brief loss of composure, bowed toward Michael. My lord, Princess Arian Evermoon of House Evermoon, has arrived safely. Michael inclined his head slightly, his tone smooth as he replied, Welcome to Thornvale, Princess. Chapter 657, Innocent Princess. Mike Nor. Thanks to her father's plan to enter the throne battle of the kingdom, he had attempted to use her as his key. Though he cared for her and would never deliberately make her suffer, in the end this was the reality for most noble women, married off to build connections. Some hated the system while others embraced it. Those who liked it did so because it benefited them. After all, had her father's plan succeeded, and she ended up marrying the future king of the kingdom, wouldn't she have risen from a duke's daughter to true royalty? It sounded like a dream to most noble ladies, but not to Ariane. She wasn't a fan of such a fate. If she couldn't marry for love, she would rather cultivate, become strong on her own, and explore the vast world freely. Unfortunately, that dream had faded away because of her father's ambitions. No one, not even her, had expected the plan to fail. But who could have foreseen that, at the final moment, someone else would seize the opportunity, and her father, whom she believed would want to change the outcome to his desired one, would actually accept it. However, this didn't make Ariane happy. In the end, she would still be marrying a stranger. Yet the first time she met Mike Nor, the slight reluctance she had in her heart vanished. That was when Ariane realized something about herself. She was more vain than she thought. The fact that her opinion changed simply because of how beautiful a man looked made her inwardly embarrassed. He was not only handsome but also strong, composed, and well-spoken. Ariane, still a young girl at heart, could not help but entertain the thought that marrying Mike Nor might not be such a terrible fate after all. The idea that her future husband could be someone so capable and striking made her chest flutter in ways she had never felt before. Since her father did not seem opposed to the idea and even subtly encouraged it, she assumed the marriage was practically settled. After all, who would refuse her? She was Ariane Evermoon, youngest daughter of Duke Evermoon. At least that was what she thought. But this Mike Nor never showed any interest, nor did he even acknowledge the arranged marriage he had supposedly fought for. Was she so undesirable? It was a new and uncomfortable experience for Ariane, one that left her uncertain of what to think or feel. She found herself in a strange state of limbo. Did she still have a fiancé? Was she engaged? Was she in a relationship? She didn't know. What she did know was that she had come to like Mike Nor, but he didn't seem to share even a fraction of those feelings. The concept of love was lost to nobles. At least compared to commoners, most nobles thought that if you could be with someone whose company you enjoyed, it could be considered love. Ariane, who had been courted by heirs and praised in the capital, for the first time in her life found herself standing on uncertain ground, unsure of her worth in another's eyes. She couldn't tell if it was pride, frustration, or something else, but when she finally found the chance to see him again, she didn't hesitate to take it. Ariane curtsied gracefully, her every movement refined, though her tone carried a teasing lilt. "Viscount Mike seems to be in good spirits these past months," she said, her lips curving into a faint smile. "You haven't even sent a single letter. Should I take that to mean Thornvale has made you forget me?" The soldiers and attendants nearby froze subtly at her words. Their eyes darted briefly between the two before quickly lowering their gazes, pretending to have heard nothing. Michael's expression did not waver, though a faint smile touched his lips, soft and fleeting. Inside, however, he sighed bitterly. To be honest, he had not expected to see the princess again, at least not this soon. Still, he could not say that aloud. Instead, he met her gaze, his voice calm yet carrying a warmth that made her heart skip. "Forgive me, princess," he said lightly. "I feared that if I wrote, my words would pale too much beside the memory of our last meeting." Ariane blinked, her composure faltering for a brief moment. The faintest flush crept up her neck before she quickly masked it behind a polite smile. For someone so composed, his words had struck deeper than she expected. She had prepared several possible lines to tease him with, perhaps to remind him of how he had ignored her existence for months. But now, under his steady gaze and that effortless charm of his, her mind went blank. Michael, noticing her silence, gave a faint, courteous nod. "It's an honor to receive you in Thornvale, princess," he continued. "I only hope the journey wasn't too tiring." Ariane finally regained her voice, though her tone came out softer than she intended. It was pleasant enough, she managed, then quickly glanced away, feigning interest in the manor's surroundings to hide her reddening cheeks. Rohan, standing to the side, caught the exchange. His lips twitched slightly, though he wisely kept silent. It seemed his earlier suspicion might not have been too far from the truth. The princess, too, had fallen prey to the quiet pull of his lord's presence. TSK. Pretty privilege truly did exist. Even a lie spoken with that kind of face sounded romantic, even to him. Michael glanced toward Ariane. You must be tired after the journey, he said. Come, princess. Thornvale may not match the capital's splendor, but I believe our cooks have prepared something you'll find enjoyable. Ariane's lips curved slightly. Are you inviting me to lunch, Viscount? She asked, a teasing note in her voice. If your highness is willing to eat with me, I would be honored. Her composure wavered again, though only for an instant. Then it would be rude of me to refuse, she said softly. Michael gestured toward the entrance. This way, princess. Chapter 658 Director. As something eventful was unfolding in the land of origin, something equally significant was taking place back in Aurora. Right now, in one of the academy's buildings, 3 students sat before a familiar figure. Michael, Rin, and another of their classmates. In front of them sat Director Arvin. They were in his office, and Michael had to admit, the director wasn't only colorful in identity but also in his surroundings. The room looked less like an office and more like a chaotic blend of everything imaginable. Papers, books, and half-open files lay stacked in uneven piles on every available surface. The walls were painted in mismatched tones, pale blue on one side and crimson on the other, as if the painter had lost interest halfway through. Several unframed paintings hung crookedly, and none seemed to belong together. One was a portrait of a noblewoman, another a landscape of a barren desert, and another looked like a child's messy attempt at abstract art. The curtains were bright yellow, their edges frayed, clashing violently with the dark green carpet that looked like it had seen better centuries. A small lamp on the desk flickered weakly, its light barely holding steady as it cast long, twitching shadows across the walls. A large stuffed chair sat behind the desk, its fabric torn at the corners, revealing patches of cotton. And sitting in it was Director Arvin himself. The man was seated cross-legged on a cushioned chair, dressed in his usual flamboyant manner. His dyed hair, a striking mix of blue and violet, glimmered under the dim light. Director Arvin, Rin began cautiously. May I ask why we were summoned? Arvin lifted his gaze, eyes sparkling with mischief as a slow smile tugged at his lips. Summoned? Such a grim word, dear Rin. Let's call it invited for a chat. Michael's brow twitched slightly. A few minutes ago, he had received a notification on his edgeband. A short, crisp message summoning him to the director's office. He didn't have anything against Director Arvin personally, but there was something about the man that always made his skin crawl. Only heaven knew how relieved he was when he realized he wasn't the only one summoned. But that relief didn't last long. Seeing who else had been called, Michael immediately understood that this wasn't some casual meeting. Seated beside him were the other top students of Year 1. Rin, who ranked second, her short silver hair glinting under the weak light of the desk lamp, and another boy he didn't recognize, whose nervous fidgeting made him seem out of place among the two. The only thing that linked them was that all 3 occupied the top positions in their year, which meant this meeting wasn't simple. Director Arvin's office only reinforced that uneasy feeling. It looked less like an office and more like a madman's collection room. Arvin's smile lingered, but the eyes he used to look at them were wrong. Michael felt it at once. Rin did too, her posture tightened by a hair. The director's gaze kept returning to the two of them, as if the third student were a shadow on the wall. The boy at third tried to sit straighter, but Arvin did not spare him a second glance. Usually, Arvin said at last, tapping a fingertip against a stack of crooked folders, this sort of thing would be handled by the principal, or the vice principal. He sighed, staring at the ceiling like it offended him. But they flew off to a God knows where, and now I am the one babysitting an entire academy. On the topic of the principal, Michael found himself quite interested. After all, the principal wasn't just any figurehead. He was the single most powerful individual in the academy. Yet for all his supposed power and prestige, Michael had never actually met him. What made the situation even stranger was that the principal himself had scheduled a private meeting with him weeks ago and then vanished. Michael couldn't help but speak out this time. "Director Arvin," he began, keeping his tone polite. "You mentioned the principal and vice principal left. Do you happen to know where they went? Or when they'll be back?" You're curious about our dear headmaster, are you?" Michael didn't answer immediately, though inwardly he sighed. To be honest, it wasn't that he was eager to meet the man. He just wanted to get it over with. Every few days, he found himself wondering when that long-delayed meeting would finally happen, only to feel that dull anxiety creep up again when there was still no news. He wanted the matter settled, nothing more. Arvin chuckled softly, resting his chin on his hand. "Ah, Michael," he said, drawing out the name like he was savoring it. "I would love to tell you where the principal went. Truly, I would. But, unfortunately," he spread his hands with exaggerated helplessness. "Rules. You know how it is." Michael frowned slightly. Rules? He was mildly disappointed, though not surprised. Still, before he could let that feeling settle, Arvin's grin widened, his voice lowering. "However, if you were to do one small thing for me, I might be tempted to break a rule or two." Michael raised an eyebrow. "A favor?" "Nothing dreadful," Arvin said quickly. "Merely a task. A simple one, for someone of your talents. You do it, and I'll tell you everything about our elusive principal." Michael's answer came faster than the director probably expected. "No." Arvin blinked. That was quick. What Michael wanted to say but couldn't was that, if it were another instructor, he might have hesitated for 2 seconds before refusing, as he preferred not to owe anyone over something unnecessary. The atmosphere in the room grew strange after that. For a brief moment, no one spoke. Director Arvin's grin remained fixed, though his eyes narrowed just slightly. Michael kept his expression neutral, though inwardly he could feel the tension thickening. He didn't regret his answer, but there was no denying that the air had taken on a heavier, almost suffocating tone. Fortunately, Rin broke it. "Director," she said suddenly, keeping her voice polite, "why exactly were we called here?" The question seemed to draw Arvin's attention away from Michael. His eerie smile softened into something resembling genuine delight, though that only made him seem more unnerving. "Ah, yes, that," Arvin said, snapping his fingers. "Ah, yes, that," he repeated, snapping his fingers again as if he had just remembered why they were there in the first place. "You see, my dear students, the year is drawing to a close, which means a new one is about to begin. And as you may or may not know, the Academy always grants a short holiday during this period, a time for students to rest, return home, see their families, and all that sentimental nonsense." At that, Michael's expression relaxed slightly. Finally, for once, it sounded like something normal, something he could look forward to. He hadn't seen his family in months, and the idea of returning home, even briefly, stirred a quiet warmth in his chest. But then Arvin kept talking. "Unfortunately," the director continued, his tone dripping with false sympathy, "that little privilege doesn't apply to everyone." The good feeling vanished. Michael's brow furrowed. "Meaning?" Arvin grinned, showing a flash of teeth. "Meaning, my dear top 3, students of year 1, that while the rest of your classmates enjoy their holiday, you will be going somewhere else." Rin's eyes narrowed slightly. "Somewhere else?" "Yes," Arvin said, his voice dropping to a gleeful whisper. "To hell." For a second, no one moved. Michael blinked. "Excuse me." The director leaned back, utterly at ease, watching their expressions, with open amusement. At first, Michael thought Arvin was cursing him. His tone certainly made it sound that way, but then he caught the faint seriousness in the man's eyes, and that was when it clicked. Hell wasn't a figure of speech in Aurora. It was real. Arvin, seeing the confusion ripple through the room, clapped his hands together. You see, top 3, top 4, top 10, they're all given opportunities. But there's a small difference. He lifted a finger and wagged it playfully in the air. Students ranked 4th and below can choose to join the expedition. They can also refuse and go home to their cozy little beds for the holiday. Michael could already tell where this was going, but he waited. However, Arvin continued, for you 3, it's mandatory. The 3rd student made a strangled noise. Mandatory? As in, we don't get a choice. Exactly. Consider it a reward for excellence. The Academy believes that those who reach the top must also bear the heaviest burdens. Growth through pain, or something poetic like that. 3rd place then asked another question. And if someone, hypothetically, wanted to avoid this? Arvin said, pretending to think. Then that someone would need to lower their rank. Quite a bit, actually. He tilted his head, his voice turning almost teasing. Drop to 4th place or lower before the year ends, and you're free to go home like everyone else. No questions asked. Then Arvin's expression changed. The grin faded. His posture straightened, and when he spoke again, his voice was no longer light or amused. But I'd be disappointed if that happened. The words came out deeper. Michael's gaze sharpened a bit. Chapter 659 Special Items. Arvin's tone lingered in the air, thick and unsettling. His lips curved again into that familiar grin, but it no longer reached his eyes. Well then, what's it going to be? Michael didn't answer. Neither did Rin. Even the 3rd student remained silent. Arvin's grin widened, clearly amused by their hesitation. Of course, I already said it's mandatory for the top 3. You must go to hell. But, Arvin added, leaning forward with mock sympathy, if you truly don't want to go, arrangements can be made. Michael's eyes narrowed slightly. Arrangements? Arvin nodded. Yes, nothing so dramatic. I'm a reasonable man. His grin turned sharp. For those who prefer not to step into hell, someone would just replace them. Arvin waved his hand lazily. He let the words hang there for a long moment, then looked at each of them in turn, his eyes gleaming faintly. So what will it be? His voice dropped an octave, losing all traces of humor. Go to hell? Or be replaced? Before any of them could answer, Arvin clapped his hands again and smiled as if none of that had happened. Splendid, he said cheerfully. I'll take that silence as a yes. Rin glanced sideways at Michael, her brow furrowing slightly. Michael didn't respond, but his eyes stayed fixed on the director. In the end, Michael signed. He hadn't planned to refuse, so it didn't matter whether he was being forced or not. From the expression on the 3rd student's face, it seemed they felt the same way. They hadn't truly intended to say no. They just wanted to understand the situation before accepting it. Director Arvin, perceptive as always, seemed to catch on. His smile brightened instantly. Excellent, he said, snapping his fingers once more. I knew you 3 would see reason. And really, you shouldn't be so gloomy about it. He leaned back in his chair with a satisfied hum. After all, as top students, this comes with its own set of rewards. You've already been receiving some, haven't you? The monthly academy points, the discounts in the school catalog, access to exclusive facilities, and let's not forget the expanded catalog itself. Twice the number of items compared to what the average student gets. Privileges everywhere. I'd say the heavens themselves favor you 3. The 3rd student tried to smile, though it came out stiff. Rin merely folded her arms, unimpressed. Michael, for his part, gave a slow nod. Arvin chuckled. Good. That's the spirit. Remember, greatness always comes with expectations, and in this case, a little trip to hell. Now then, this brings us back to what I mentioned earlier, about how this sort of matter should really be handled by the principal or vice principal. He yawned before continuing. You see, it's tradition. Before the top 3 of the first year depart for hell, they're granted something special by the Academy. A small gift, but one meant to show the school's appreciation for your excellence. You will each receive a free item from the special catalog. Not the ordinary one your peers can access, mind you. This is an exclusive list reserved for the top items that can't be bought with points or credits, no matter how hard one tries. Michael blinked, caught off guard. A free item? Indeed, Arvin replied. A token of recognition, and perhaps a little something to keep you alive when you step into that charming place we call hell. Michael remained quiet. This was news to him. He had heard nothing about such a privilege. In fact, he had assumed the only special treatment he would get from the academy was the one he had already received, the replacement corpses to make up for those lost during the third round of the unified exams. So there was something like this too? Arvin noticed his reaction immediately. Ah, you didn't know? Well, consider it a pleasant surprise. The principal usually handles these matters personally, but since he's off gallivanting somewhere beyond my reach, I'll be the one issuing the catalog this year. He reached into a messy pile of folders on his desk, rummaging through papers until he pulled out a sheet of paper and handed it to Michael. Here, he said, sliding it across the desk. This contains the catalog. You'll find everything from extraordinary grade artifacts to enchanted accessories, law seeds, and even a few oddities. Arvin smiled. Pick wisely, my dear top 3. Once you've made your choice, you tell me. I'll have the item prepared and delivered before your departure. Michael lowered his gaze to the sheet in his hand. The paper was thick. He had barely skimmed the top line when a small, almost imperceptible movement tugged at the edge of his vision. Rin. When Arvin slid the paper over, she had looked composed, even bored. But up close, the cracks showed. Her fingers, resting on her knee, had tightened for a heartbeat. The tendon at her wrist had stood out. She was not as calm as she looked. Michael's mind flicked back to her brother, Rin, and the way he had moved against him from the moment he entered the academy. Was this list the reason? He had suspected it the instant Arvin said, "Special catalog." When he read the first entry, he stopped suspecting. He knew. Enhancer, 3-star extraordinary grade. Once a 1-star epic grade artifact that was partially destroyed and dropped in rank. This effect, when activated, boosts the effectiveness of a law by at least 200%. The duration lasts 10 minutes, and with natural recovery, requires 4 months of cooldown. Michael's eyes moved once, slowly, to Rin. Her posture did not change, but her throat worked a small swallow. She could not hide. So this was it. This was the highest grade item on the list. Michael leaned back slightly, eyes lingering on the description before, flicking again toward Rin. Her expression was smooth now, too smooth. No trace of tension remained, but that calmness was precisely what confirmed his suspicion. So this was what she and her brother had been after all along. It explained everything. The pressure during the unified exams, the sudden shift in their attitude once he began surpassing them. It was never just about rank. It was about the reward attached to it. Still, Michael wasn't about to play the benevolent fool. Even if he hadn't yet comprehended a law, the enhancer's effect was nothing short of extraordinary. Boosting a law's strength by 200% for even 10 minutes could change the tide of a war, much less a single battle. Just because he hadn't awakened a law didn't mean it was useless to him. Patient man could wait. He was not giving this away. He was about to make his decision when something else caught his attention and made him pause. Further down the list, nestled among the rare materials and strange fragments, was an item listed without flourish or lengthy description. Spatial or 1-star extraordinary material, estimated mass, 3 kilograms. A condensed fragment of spatial stone, formed from the collapse of an artificial rift. Stable, responsive to mana, high purity. Michael's eyes narrowed slightly. While it wasn't the flashiest thing on the list, he knew exactly how rare it was. Spatial materials of any grade were priceless. But what made it more precious to him was that, for the first time in a long while, he had actually found something he could use to evolve wisdom into a true spatial beast. Unfortunately, this was the special list, and though he had the privilege of picking first, he couldn't choose more than one item. After this, it would be hard for him to see such a material again. Now Michael was in a sort of conflict. The enhancer was surely a great item to have, but evolving wisdom was just as important. One was external strength, and the other was more of a personal one. Suddenly, a soft, clear voice echoed in Michael's mind. "Let's make a deal." Michael's eyes froze on the paper for half a second. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. "What kind of deal?" Michael asked in his mind, his tone neutral. "Don't play dumb." Rin's voice came again, smooth but sharper now. "You already know what I'm talking about." Of course he did. He didn't need to ask to understand what she wanted. The enhancer, the 3-star extraordinary artifact at the top of the list. Still, he decided to play along. "I'm afraid you'll have to be specific," he replied casually, shifting slightly in his seat as if stretching his legs. "I'm not sure what you mean." A faint scoff came through the telepathic link, one that sounded halfway between annoyance and disbelief. "You're not a fool, Michael. I want the enhancer." Michael's lips twitched ever so slightly. "You seem awfully confident that I'd give it up." "You can't even use it yet," Rin said bluntly. "You haven't comprehended a law. It'll just sit in your storage collecting dust while someone who actually understands its worth could put it to use immediately." Her reasoning was solid but irrelevant. He let a brief silence fill the link before replying. "And yet, you're asking me for it, which means you can't get it without me." Chapter 660 Negotiation. The telepathic link went silent for a moment. Rin didn't reply right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. "You're right. I can't get it without you. But what if I told you I don't need to keep it?" Michael raised an eyebrow slightly, though he kept his eyes on the list. Meaning I only need to borrow it." That caught his attention, though his tone stayed even. "Borrow it?" "Yes," Rin said. "Just for a short time. I have something to accomplish with it. Afterward, you can have it back. Intact." Michael almost laughed. "You think I'd hand over a 3-star artifact on trust alone?" "I'd return it," Rin replied smoothly. "You have my word." "Your word doesn't exactly have any existing reputation in my experience," Michael said dryly. There was a pause, and then a faint exhale from her end of the link. "You don't have to trust me. We can make a formal agreement. A mana oath." That made him pause for half a second. A mana oath wasn't something to take lightly. It bound the soul to its promise. Michael didn't respond immediately. His gaze stayed fixed on the paper, but his thoughts shifted to the voice in his mind. "Even if I could lend it to you," he said calmly, "there's no way I'd do it for free." Rin went quiet for a heartbeat. She wasn't surprised. If anything, she expected him to say that. "You want interest," she said, her tone measured, as though she were talking business rather than begging a favor. Michael's lips curved slightly, but he said nothing. "Fine," Rin said, cutting to the point. 50,000 mana stones. Every month I hold the artifact." Michael blinked once, a small flicker of surprise crossing his features. That wasn't a small amount. Mana stones were one of the few currencies that held universal value. A mana stone was priced at $1,000 per stone, so 50,000 mana stones were worth $50 million. However, you could use the stones to get money, but not the money to get the stones. Rin showed she was indeed serious about this deal. Still, Michael didn't answer immediately. He let the silence stretch, keeping her guessing. Rin finally spoke again, a hint of irritation slipping through. "You can't seriously think I'd give you more." However, Michael didn't respond. That made Rin hesitate again. "You don't want mana stones?" she asked, skeptical now. "I didn't say that," he replied. Rin went quiet once more. Then, finally, her tone softened. "Then what do you want? If you can change the stones to spirit crystals, then we can talk." "Spirit crystals?" Rin repeated slowly, her composed tone cracking slightly. Spirit crystals were leagues above mana stones. A single crystal of equal grade was worth at least 10 mana stones. Even for a family as powerful as hers, collecting large quantities wasn't simple. "You're not saying anything," Michael prodded lightly. "Because I'm thinking," Rin replied, her tone sharp again. Then, after a brief pause, she added, "You realize that's a ridiculous demand, right?" Michael didn't say anything. though it looked like they had a lengthy conversation as it was. Through the mind, even with its ups and downs, everything was happening in a fast haste. Silence followed again. Rin knew he had her cornered. Finally, she sighed. Fine. Michael's eyebrow rose slightly. Fine. Yes, she said. 50,000 mana stones converted to 5,000 spirit crystals. Every month I keep the enhancer. Michael's smile deepened a little inside. But Michael wasn't in a rush to accept. Not yet. Because now that Rin had shown she could pay in spirit crystals, it meant she was desperate enough to pay even more. Michael waited a few seconds before replying, letting the mental silence stretch long enough to make her uncomfortable. Then, with a calm tone, he asked, How many spatial stones can you get your hands on? Spatial stones. Rin repeated, her tone tight. Why are you asking about that? Because I've seen you use them before, Michael said simply. In our last fight, you teleported. That wasn't a spell, was it? Your suit must have used a spatial stone, which means you have access to them. For a split second, Rin almost lost her composure. Michael could sense the edge of her temper flare through the mental link. She wanted to snap at him, to tell him he was pushing too far. But just as quickly, she caught herself. After a deep, steady breath, her tone returned to normal. You're asking for too much. Then consider it the last thing I want from you, Michael said. Finally, Rin sighed. Fine. 3 spatial stones. 1 kilogram at most. No more than that. Michael was just about to smile when Rin spoke again. If I give you the spatial stones, then I'm not paying in spirit crystals. His smile froze. Fine, he said at last. No spirit crystals. A small ripple of satisfaction moved through the link. Rin was pleased, her first real win in the back and forth. But it lasted all of a second. But the spatial stone on the special list isn't included, Michael added. And you need a deposit to take it from me. I'm not lending. The satisfaction snapped. Back in the land of origin, a certain viscount and princess were sharing a meal. Platters covered the low walnut table in a neat rush of color. Bowls of fresh fruit took the center. Around them, the maids had set what they could make on short notice. Flaky baked pies filled with herb chicken, crispy yam chips dusted with salt and pepper, tiny cheese squares with a drizzle of wildflower honey, and skewers of roasted mushroom caps brushed in garlic oil. There were also 2 baskets of warm flatbread, a small dish of spiced nuts, and a trio of jams. It was not a banquet, but it was tidy and arranged with care. Thanks for reading today's chapters. Chapter 661 Purpose. Edited. Arian swept in with an apologetic smile, the hem of her travel cloak still dusty. I came without warning. I apologize. Michael glanced over the spread and nodded once. It's fine, princess. It is our pleasure to enjoy a meal with you. The maids hovered at the edge of the room, waiting. Michael sampled a grape, then one of the baked pies. He set his plate down, satisfied. You all may excuse us now. The maids bowed and quietly withdrew, their soft steps fading into the hall. Michael turned his gaze toward Arian. Princess, eat with me, he said. Taking one of the baked pies, Arian bit into it delicately, then reached for a grape and chewed thoughtfully. It's good, she said at last, her eyes flicking toward the table. The flavor's pleasant, simple but warm. The herbs are a bit sharp, though. Still, she smiled faintly. They don't hold the novelty of Lord Michael's homeland chocolate. Michael blinked once, his expression unreadable. Chocolate? Yes, she said brightly, the faintest laugh escaping her lips. The one you gifted me last time. The dark one that melted almost instantly on my tongue. I've never tasted anything like it. She rested her chin lightly on her hand, her eyes distant as she described it. It was strange at first, bitter but smooth, then sweet, but not too much. It left this warmth on the palate, like magic condensed into flavor. I actually tried to find it in the markets of the capital, but no one seemed to know of such a treat. Michael gave a small, polite nod, though inwardly, he hid his bemusement. The homeland chocolate she spoke of was nothing. more than a store-bought bar from Aurora itself, packaged in a plain casing that gave away nothing about its origin. Still, her amazement was understandable. After all, the productivity levels between both worlds were vastly different. What was common and cheap in Aurora could easily be seen as exotic luxury here. He reached for another slice of fruit, the faintest hint of a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. I'm glad you liked it. If the princess wants more, I can prepare some for you to take back, he said calmly. Ariane's smile brightened at once, her eyes glimmering with the same open warmth that always seemed to disarm the people around her. Truly? Then I'll hold you to that, Lord Mike. Thank you. Her tone carried genuine delight, an unfeigned happiness that softened the natural authority in her bearing. For a brief moment, the room felt lighter, the silence between them gentle instead of formal. They continued their meal in quiet after that. Michael ate at a steady pace, his thoughts calm but measured. The princess seemed content to simply sit there, occasionally glancing toward him before looking away with a faint smile. When they had nearly finished, Michael finally broke the silence, his tone polite but direct. It truly is an honor to have you here, princess, he said, setting down his cup of tea. But the journey from the capital to Thornvale is long, and not an easy one. I'm happy to see you, of course, but surely, for such a distance, there must be a purpose. Ariane paused mid-sip, her cup hovering just below her lips. Then, with a faint frown and a teasing glint in her eyes, she lowered the cup. So, the Viscount thinks I cannot visit without a reason? She asked lightly. That I only come when there's business to discuss? Michael was speechless for a moment, caught between manners and uncertainty. He set his cup down slowly before replying, Of course not, princess. I only meant that as friends it's natural to visit one another, but it's also natural to be curious when the visit comes from so far away. Ariane's brows lifted slightly, the corners of her lips curving into a faint smile. So, the Viscount sees us as normal friends? Michael opened his mouth to answer, but for some reason, the words stalled in his throat. The question felt like a trap. A simple yes should have been harmless, yet the way she asked it made it sound layered. He hesitated, unsure if she was teasing or testing him. Before he could decide on a proper response, Ariane's composure broke into a soft, melodic laugh. She covered her mouth lightly with her hand. I'm teasing you, Lord Mike, she said between small chuckles. You look far too serious. Michael exhaled quietly, the faintest ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. You're right, she continued, her voice softening as the laughter faded. I didn't come all this way just for a friendly visit. Ariane set her cup down and leaned back slightly, her expression returning to its usual grace. You were actually summoned to the capital, Lord Mike, she said. Michael's brows furrowed ever so slightly. Summoned? Yes, Ariane replied, meeting his gaze. By royal decree. It's an important event, one that concerns the kingdom as a whole. Michael's fingers drummed lightly on the table. He didn't show it, but the word royal made him wary. He never enjoyed dealings that involved the higher echelons of the kingdom. Too many politics. Still, his voice remained steady. May I ask if the princess knows why? Ariane gave a small nod, her lips curving faintly. I was coming to that. She adjusted her posture, sitting straighter. It's actually quite an opportunity for you, Lord Mike. An opportunity? Michael repeated, the edge of curiosity slipping into his tone. Ariane's eyes glimmered slightly with restrained excitement. Yes, you see, there's been an opening to enter a secret realm, one left behind by a powerful figure from the old ages. That made Michael pause. A powerful figure? He asked slowly. The princess nodded, her expression serious now. Not just powerful. A strong man beyond comparison. Someone even stronger than the strongest in our kingdom. Her words lingered in the air like a quiet echo, and for a brief moment, even the faint sound of the wind outside the windows seemed to still. Michael leaned back slightly, studying her face for signs of exaggeration. But Ariane didn't seem like she was trying to impress him. If anything, She looked genuinely intrigued, perhaps even a little reverent. He exhaled softly. Stronger than the strongest in the kingdom, you say? Wouldn't that mean this was related to a rank 4 superpower? Chapter 662 Exchange concluded. Edited. More than a month in the academy was enough to enrich Michael's knowledge about the supernatural world. If those below rank 3 were said to be laying the foundation to wield true power, then rank 3 and above were when one truly gained it, as the universe itself acknowledged their existence. The first step was to comprehend a law and condense it into a law seed, then use it to ascend beyond one's foundation. This was rank 3. The next step was to comprehend one's law to the extent it could be manifested outward. It was not as simple as using it. One had to transform the law seed into a law domain. This stage was known as creating the seed of a world within oneself, and it marked the hallmark of a rank 4 being. Above this was rank 5, where that domain transitioned into a small world capable of containing living creatures. Rank 3 was within Michael's reach, but rank 4 and 5 were still far away, and only the heavens knew when he would attain them. So something related to beings at that level naturally caught his attention. He no longer frowned at the thought of meeting the kingdom's higher-ups and even felt he should be a bit more proactive. But first, he needed to understand the situation. In the Lionheart Kingdom, the power stages went from basic to intermediate to advanced to grand stage, and then to the great stage, which was equivalent to a rank 3 being. Above that, a rank 4 was known as a legendary being. The secret realm of a legendary being? Arian nodded softly. To make things easier to understand, allow me to summarize everything from the beginning, she said. Michael leaned back slightly in his chair, listening. It all started when the old king stepped down from the throne to retire, she continued. Michael's eyes narrowed slightly. He had already known of the king's retirement from the moment he encountered the natives in the land of origin. In fact, he had even encountered 2 of the possible successors to the throne during his time in the capital. One had appeared during the auction, and the other he had seen in Mage Lien's office. Still, he couldn't see how the king's retirement connected to the secret realm she mentioned. He didn't interrupt, though. It is said that there has never been a Lionheart king without the strength of the grand stage, Arian began. Every ruler in our history, without exception, has held that level of power. Michael tilted his head slightly, curious now. Every king? She nodded. Yes, I'll let you in on a secret, though it's one known among noble houses and those with influence. Every talentless Lionheart king in history that reached that level was helped. Michael's eyes narrowed faintly. Helped? Through a ritual, Arian said simply. A ceremony known only to the royal bloodline and their closest retainers. It forcefully pushes the chosen heir to the peak of the grand stage, granting them the strength worthy of a ruler. In a world governed by power, expecting the mighty to obey someone weaker than themselves would be folly. So the ritual was created to ensure that the one on the throne would always stand above their peers. Michael stayed silent, listening. He didn't need her to explain why such a practice existed. Arian continued, thanks to the royal family's vast resources, the process is not deadly nor as corruptive as other methods that could achieve the same results. But it does have one major drawback. Michael's brow furrowed slightly. Which is? The loss of lifespan, Arian said softly. Or rather, the lack of it. Those who undergo the ritual gain immense power, but their life expectancy remains ordinary. They cannot share the longevity that people of their power enjoy. She reached out for a grape before continuing again. The only way to overcome that limitation is to ascend, to break through and become a great being, one beyond the grand stage itself. That is why the old king chose to retire. After decades of rule, he decided to pursue ascension and left the kingdom to seek opportunities beyond its borders. Michael acknowledged the logic in silence. The ritual made sense in a world where strength ruled. Yet the path beyond it was as cruel as it was clear. Ascension was never easy, not even for those who clawed their way to the peak of rank 2 on their own. His time in the academy had taught him a truth. Breaking into rank 3 did not demand a powerful strength. It demanded understanding. In theory, even a mortal could step into rank 3 in a single breath if their grasp of reality crossed a threshold. But in reality, if people steeped in power failed at it year after year, a mortal reaching it might as well be a myth. Back to the matter at hand, Michael could already guess how the secret realm had come into play. His hunch was confirmed the next moment. It was during the old king's travels that he found an entrance to a secret realm, the exact one I'm talking about now. Still, Michael was confused about one thing. With the value of such a realm, how was it his turn to know about its existence? If it were him, he would hoard it for himself. He didn't believe a king with the power to decide the life and death of millions would be more generous than him. Fortunately, Ariane's next words cleared his confusion. Ariane read his doubt and answered with a calm nod. "You are thinking the royal family would never share a realm like this," she said. "You are right to think so. If they could hide it, they would. However, they could not." Michael waited. "The realm announced itself the moment the kingdom found its entrance," she explained, with signs that any expert could read. It was vast, and its presence alone stirred the world. Even powerful figures outside the kingdom took notice. "You know the saying, a man with a treasure is a guilty man." Her eyes met his. "That is why you are hearing it now. Because of the pressure from other nations, the kingdom had no choice but to share this treasure." Michael was beginning to understand, though one thing still puzzled him. "Even if that's the case, what does that have to do with me? Surely the kingdom has people capable of entering the secret realm." Ariane smiled and replied, "Yes, but unfortunately for the royal family, the secret realm has an age restriction. No one above 30 can enter." Michael's brows rose slightly. "Coincidentally," she continued, "there are many young and strong people in the kingdom, but very few at your level. You just happen to be one of them, if not the best of them. After all, you defeated the prince of an empire." Michael's expression, calm at first, shifted slightly at her words. "Sorry, excuse me?" Back in Aurora, all 3 students that belonged to the top 3 of the first year had told Director Arvin what they wanted. Director Arvin gave a smile as the 3 finished stating their choices. "Good," he said, folding his hands behind his back. "In a few hours, you'll receive your requested items. If you need to use them wisely, because in 1 week's time you'll be heading to hell." The word hung in the air like a curse. Even though they had heard its name before, the way the director said it made the room fall silent for a moment. Hell. It sounded ominous. "In this 1 week," Arvin continued, "you should prepare yourselves, because your trip to hell isn't a simple excursion. It's an assessment." Michael, seated beside Rin, frowned slightly. Michael glanced briefly at Rin, who looked as though she already knew. The 3rd student beside them, however, appeared just as puzzled as he was. "An assessment?" he asked. "What do you mean by that, Director?" Arvin's smile didn't fade. "Exactly what it sounds like. The Academy's first-year evaluation for its top students will take place in Hell. Hell is a dimensional zone with 100 floors. Each floor is a world of its own. Your task, as the Academy's top first years, is simple. You must clear at least 5 floors before you can leave." Michael's brows furrowed slightly. "So we're to fight our way through 5 worlds and then return? That's the assessment." The director nodded. "Yes, but don't think you're the only ones doing this. Every major Awakener Academy across the world sends its top students into hell during this time too. So that means aside from demons, you'll also be seeing your fellow peers. Not just them. This might also be your chance to see another race different from us. After all, Aurora is not the only realm that has access to hell. Thousands of races do as well. Thanks for reading today's chapter. Chapter 663, Top 3. The concept of seeing another race was fascinating to Michael. It stirred a quiet sense of anticipation in him and made him even more eager to step into hell. In truth, there was no real disadvantage for him there. Hell, after all, was said to contain an almost endless number of monsters, and to Michael that only meant one thing: experience points and corpses. He could farm as much experience as he wanted. It might not help him directly, but it would for his undead. Who knew? By the time he came back, his major undead might all be at least level 60. Soon all three were dismissed and went back to their residences, where they would wait for their desired items. As he brought out a law seed to comprehend while he waited, the other Michael was already settling Princess Arian in the manor. Arian dabbed her lips gently with a napkin, her tone warm and polite. "Thank you for the meal, Lord Mike. It was far better than I expected from something prepared on such short notice." Michael smiled lightly and shook his head. "It was no trouble at all, Princess. I am glad it was to your liking. You should rest now, though. The journey from the capital is long, and you must be tired." Arian gave a graceful nod, her usual poise returning. "Then I'll take my leave for tonight. I'll have my attendant inform you once I've rested." Michael stood as she rose. "Of course." He watched quietly as she exited the dining room, her cloak trailing softly behind her. The sound of her steps faded. For a few seconds, silence lingered. Then the polite smile that had been on Michael's face slowly faded, replaced by a thoughtful expression. The princess's words still lingered in his mind, about the secret realm, the kingdom's intentions, and his supposed role in it all. Like the princess had said, there were many strong people in the kingdom, but not many who were both strong and under 30. He just happened to be part of that rare category. Her words explained why he had been summoned. Among the limited quota granted to the kingdom, a handful of spots were reserved for specific individuals. Out of all the participants, Arian had explained earlier, some positions are already claimed by members of the royal family. Others are reserved for the top 3 participants of Duke Evermoon's contest, yourself included. The rest will be filled by those backed by influential noble houses. But unlike us or the contest victors, they will have to fight for their place. Michael had recalled her tone when she said it, neither prideful nor mocking, just calmly stating fact. According to her, individuals like herself, the royal children, and the winners of Evermoon's contest were given their spots automatically. The rest, however, had to earn theirs through combat. Michael could understand the nobles' arrangement. After all, the royal family would naturally prioritize their own bloodline and the most influential houses. What he could not understand, however, was his own involvement, especially the role assigned to him. He had assumed, at first, that his participation was purely merit-based, a recognition of his victory in Duke Evermoon's contest. But as Arian went on to clarify, the truth was far less flattering. Though she tried to soften it with graceful phrasing, her words were clear enough. They were bodyguards. Very powerful ones, yes, grand stage combatants chosen for their strength, but still guards all the same. Michael wasn't offended. Not really. If anything, he found it slightly amusing. So that was how the kingdom intended to use them, to protect its precious heirs while also sending them into a dangerous unknown. But did that mean he would refuse? Of course not. Following the noble children meant accompanying them into the secret realm. That alone made the position worthwhile. It gave him unrestricted access to the same opportunities the royal family was after, and perhaps even more. Besides, according to Arian, the arrangement wasn't forced. "The kingdom has allowed freedom of choice," she had said. "You and the other 2 may refuse without consequence. Not that they can do anything to you for this reason. But if you accept, aside from keeping an eye on the noble heirs, you won't be bound to follow their commands. You'll be majorly free to act as you wish inside the realm." Without her saying it outright, Michael already understood the kingdom's real motive. They were playing it safe. By including people like him, independent, strong, and not tied to noble politics, the Lionheart Kingdom ensured that if anything went wrong inside the realm, someone capable would be there to intervene. It was a precaution disguised as an honor. Of course, even if the arrangement reduced him to a babysitter, Michael would still go. The chance at a rank 4 legacy was not something a rank 2 could afford to ignore. Pride did not feed growth, and opportunity rarely knocked twice. According to the princess, if he agreed to participate, they would depart for the capital in 1 week. Until then, he was expected to give a clear answer. "Does that mean I'll see Yuga and Ren again?" A subconscious smile crept onto Michael's face at the thought of meeting them again. One was a sword genius, Ren Noah. The other was Yuga, a monster in human flesh. Remembering the clash with Yuga made Michael's smile widen before it faded into a sigh. That battle had been one of the few he truly enjoyed, raw, unrestrained, and honest. But that was months ago. Michael doubted they'd ever face each other again in such a way. He didn't know how much stronger Yuga had become since then, but something told him the man couldn't have surpassed him. Michael's path had been anything but stagnant. Then there was Ren. The youth's mysterious sword chi had allowed him to fight above his level. But even with that advantage, Michael had long since surpassed the realm Ren could go against. Their gap was no longer something that could be bridged by talent or willpower alone. Chapter 664 Spatial Stones. Then there was Ren. The youth's mysterious sword chi had allowed him to fight above his level. But even with that advantage, Michael had long since surpassed the realm Ren could go against. Their gap was no longer something that could be bridged by talent or willpower alone. And he had even been fighting them with a handicap. Still, the thought of seeing both of them again brought a faint glint to his eyes. But of course, there were still things Michael had to worry about. The prince of the empire that stood above the Lionheart Kingdom, Prince Rue. He would be coming too. Ariane had exaggerated when she said Michael defeated him. In truth, it wasn't him but Ren who had done so. Michael had merely been the one to claim the final victory and take the prize that symbolized the Empire Prince's loss. Michael could only hope this wouldn't cause any problems. Surely no one would be foolish enough to hold a grudge over something like that, right? Still, hearing that Prince Rue was true imperial royalty had surprised him. When he first heard the title Prince, he had assumed it was something like Aryan status, perhaps a duke's son or a family member of the Lionheart royal family. But learning that Rue was an actual royal from an empire far superior to the Lionheart Kingdom gave the situation a different weight altogether. Even so, Michael found himself surprisingly calm. The revelation didn't intimidate him. Michael exhaled softly, letting the thought fade. There was no point wasting time worrying about the prince or politics. If trouble came, he would deal with it as he always did, decisively. With that, Michael pushed aside the distracting thoughts and returned to his study. Like that, 2 days passed without much incident. On the third day, in the academy back in Aurora, Michael stood outside the barrier surrounding his villa, his gaze fixed on a familiar figure standing a short distance away. Rin. She held a small box in her hands. Her silver hair was neatly tied back. A few days ago, just a few hours after they had left Director Arvin's office, Rin had come looking for him. Her reason for showing up was to perform the mana oath between them. Though she never said it outright, Michael had easily figured out why. She didn't want him going back on his word once the academy delivered the enhancer. Perhaps she feared he'd keep it for himself rather than lend it to her as promised. Michael had laughed inwardly at the thought. If Rin truly suspected him of being that petty, she'd soon swallow those doubts the moment the enhancer arrived. And someone did. But it wasn't Rin, it was him. When the academy delivered the treasure, a smooth crystalline orb etched with faint runes, Michael had taken his time studying it before testing it out with his undead law energy. The result nearly left him speechless. The enhancer doubled the effect of any law it interacted with. In simple terms, it could boost a law's manifestation by twofold, temporarily allowing them to operate on a level far beyond their usual state. 200%. That number didn't sound like much until he actually felt it, until the air itself trembled from the sheer pressure of his undead laws responding to it. The moment he experienced that amplification firsthand, regret hit him like a hammer. He had rented it out far too cheaply. 200% wasn't a small boost, especially not when it came to laws. It was the difference between suppressing an opponent and overwhelming them entirely. For a brief moment, Michael had seriously considered finding a way to extend his rental fee, but the agreement had already been sealed with the mana oath. He could only click his tongue at his own generosity and vow never to underestimate an artifact's worth again. Rin spoke first, her tone calm but distant. In the box are 2 spatial stones. Before the end of the month, I'll send the remaining 2. Michael nodded once. He didn't doubt her. After all, they had a mana contract between them now. If she dared to break it, the backlash alone would cripple her severely. Whatever else Rin might be, She wasn't stupid enough to risk that. Without another word, Michael reached into his storage space and brought out a box of his own. They both extended their hands. At the same moment, they exchanged boxes. The movement was simple, silent, and efficient. No wasted gestures, no unnecessary words. Both understood that their deal was complete. Rin turned without looking back and began walking away, her silver hair swaying lightly behind her. Michael watched her for a second before turning in the opposite direction, heading back into his villa. Inside the villa, Michael went straight to his room and placed the box on the table before him. Then, with a flick of his fingers, the box opened with a soft click. Inside lay 2 stones, black as the void, smooth to the touch, and speckled with tiny, shimmering lights that pulsed faintly like distant stars. They looked almost alive, each one humming with subtle spatial fluctuations that warped the air around them. Despite their size, barely larger than a clenched fist, each stone weighed heavily in his hand. Michael turned one over slowly, feeling the faint ripple of energy bleed against his skin. Spatial stones were among the rarest and most valuable natural treasures in the universe. They served as the core material for spatial artifacts such as rings, bracelets, vaults, and teleportation arrays. Every cultivator in Aurora, from novice to master, dreamed of owning a spatial ring. It was more than convenience. It was a mark of power and status. Even a low-grade spatial ring could hold several cubic meters of space, and all of them required at least a fragment of spatial stone during their creation. Michael studied the stone more closely, watching the faint distortions shimmer across its surface. "So this is what they're made of," he murmured. A small smile crossed his lips. "Perfect," he muttered. "Wisdom will love these." Chapter 665 Evolving 1. Inside the damaged coffin of forgotten spatial space, a youth in a black top and pants with an owl on his shoulder could be seen, surrounded by multiple beasts of varying sizes. The air rippled faintly around them, filled with the scent of mana and faint traces of death energy. There were monsters of all kinds, creatures of different shapes and colors. Some were monkey-like, their fur covered in strange, bright hues. Others were ape-like, massive in build and radiating an aura of primitive might. 2 among them were particularly familiar. They had once been black apes, creatures Michael had taken from the spatial crack he and his 2 classmates had cleared back in Woodstone City. Under his control, they had evolved into blue apes, attaining the rare rank. Later, they advanced further into gray apes as extraordinary rank. Creatures, scorpion-shaped monsters, crawled across the ground nearby. Through the academy channels, Michael had gathered a collection of undead that mirrored the variety of life itself. The result of Michael's connections and time in the academy was evident in this space. There were tiger-like beasts, goat-shaped creatures, and even smaller undead resembling rats, ants, and mosquitoes. In one corner of the coffin space, a school of fish-like undead drifted lazily through a floating sphere of black water. Beside them, a few hulking beasts towered and looked like elephants. Michael stood silently, observing them with calm satisfaction. Through their shared link, his calm voice echoed directly into the minds of his undead. "You're making the space a little crowded. Change into your human forms." Immediately, a ripple of energy spread through the confined space as the undead responded. One after another, they began to shift. Bones cracked and rearranged, monstrous limbs shrank, and dark energy surged around their bodies as transformation began. Before the change completed, however, several of them bent forward and vomited out strange objects. At first glance, it looked like chunks of debris, but on closer inspection, they were actually folded garment shirts, cloaks, pants, belts, and even boots, all stored within their bodies. Michael wasn't surprised. Thanks to the undead transformation, their clothing often got destroyed during battle or while shifting between forms. To solve that, he had ordered those capable of storing things to keep spare clothes inside their bodies. The ones who couldn't were instructed to hand theirs to those who could. Of course, this method only worked when they weren't in combat, but it saved him the hassle of constantly having to replace uniforms after every evolution, transformation, or fight. The last thing he wanted was to deal with an army of naked undead every time. Soon, one by one, the monsters finished their transformations. The massive forms of beasts and grotesque abominations were replaced by human shapes, men and women of varying heights and builds, each with distinctive traits that betrayed their inhuman origins. Every single one of them looked human at first glance, yet there was an underlying otherworldly quality to them. Michael's gaze swept across them, his expression unreadable but faintly pleased. He couldn't help but feel increasingly satisfied as he looked at them. After all, the undead in this space with him were all rank 3 creatures. This was also why Michael was sure his former friends couldn't match him. Even the Michael from 2 months ago was weaker than the current one, not just in power but in knowledge as well. Michael lowered the owl from his shoulder to the ground with care. Wisdom blinked its eyes and hooted once. For all its pride, it was still the weakest in the Legion, and the only beast with true spatial talent at rank 0. That alone gave it a special place at Michael's side. Michael had refused to evolve it for this very reason. Its talent came from a strange mutation, and rushing an evolution without the right essence could dull or even erase that gift. He would rather build a deep foundation first, then push it up the ranks in one clean climb. This was why, even though he had materials now, Michael still wasn't trying to evolve wisdom with them but instead merge them. After the first merge he did with Ace, then Spartan, Michael did not stop. He kept going. He did not dare attempt it with every undead under his banner as he didn't have enough evolution points for such a thing. But for his Magers, thanks to the added loyalty bonus, he had already merged each one with his blood. From that work, he had come to understand the clear line between merge and evolution. Evolution raised a creature's grade. It set a new ceiling and a new floor. His talent handled the heavy lifting, and the result was more or less stable. Merge was different. Merge rewrote the foundation. It did not jump a rank by force. It changed what the creature was from the inside out. That meant the outcome lived or died on his planning. A good plan produced good results, and a bad merge did the opposite. Michael still remembered one of his undead goats. He had misjudged and merged it with a material that it wasn't compatible with. The skin sloughed like candle wax, and when he pushed an emergency evolution to save it, the creature stabilized but emerged as something new, a beast with acidic abilities that birthed a new creature entirely. There were bright outcomes too. In a few cases, a merge alone without evolution had shifted race and even nudged rank. That was the promise of foundation work. Change the roots and the trunk follows. Michael ran a finger along Wisdom's crown and let his thoughts settle. What would the case be for the owl? Without hesitation, Michael pricked his finger and let a single drop of blood fall onto Wisdom's head. The blood glowed faintly, sinking into the bird's feathers like molten light. He then placed the 2 spatial stones beside the owl, one to the left and one to the right. Before the owl could even react, Michael had already activated his talent. The effect was immediate. Wisdom's entire body flared with light, pure, transparent, and rippling like clear water under moonlight. The small stones beside it vibrated violently, their speckled cores releasing countless threads of starlight that streamed into Wisdom's body. Michael could see it, the fusion of his bloodline and the spatial energy within the stones, both being drawn into Wisdom's foundation. Michael's expression remained calm but focused. After all, Wisdom was one of a kind. If he noticed anything odd in his favor, he would immediately evolve the owl. He would rather have a failed evolution than a dead owl. A cry tore through the coffin space. Wisdom's shriek was sharp and raw. The other undead stirred slightly, but none moved. They were used to such scenes. Michael didn't flinch. Pain was part of every transformation. The scream meant the process was working, that Wisdom's body was resisting and adapting at the same time. "Endure it," he said softly through their link. Michael observed for a while longer before turning away. Around him, his undead army sat in absolute silence, each in their human form, each in a meditative pose. This was something Michael had discovered weeks ago, almost by accident. Whenever he performed a merge or an evolution, threads of law essence bled into the air, lingering like invisible mist. At first he hadn't noticed, But soon he realized his undead were subtly growing stronger just by existing near him during these sessions. The effect wasn't dramatic but steady, an invisible form of nourishment. That discovery had changed everything. Michael now understood something crucial about his talent. He glanced around at his undead, his lips curving slightly. He looked back at Wisdom, whose evolution didn't seem like it would end anytime soon, and continued observing as the transformation went on. A few more minutes passed. The light around Wisdom began to pulse. Slower. Then, with a faint sound like cracking glass, a series of transparent panels shimmered into existence before Michael. Lines of glowing text scrolled across them, filled with familiar messages and notifications. He ignored the routine ones, things like Blood Servant, and instead focused on the final few. Your mutated Blood Servant has evolved into a 3-star rare rank Void Feather. Void Feather has advanced to rank 2. Phase Shift has advanced to Perfect Mastery. Void Feather has gained 3 new skills. New skills gained. 1. Dimensional Shroud Basic temporarily cloaks the user in warped space, rendering them invisible to physical and spiritual perception for a short duration. 2. Fold Blink Intermediate instantly shifts the user through folded space. 3. Singularity Pulse Intermediate condenses unstable spatial energy into a single point before releasing it outward. 3 new skills, Michael murmured, and all spatial in nature. Thanks for reading today's chapter. And for those wondering about the slow updates, this is because another semester exam is on the way. Why they decided to have it on the last months of the year is beyond me. Crying face.